Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto decided to leave Konoha and becomes a ninja of Kumo part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The Kumo ninja. Naruto was hungry. This was unfortunately not a rare state of being for him. Naruto was usually hungry not because he had a fast metabolism or because he was on a diet, but because it was almost impossible for him to get food in the first place. Stores and restaurants refused to serve him, so he had to find food for himself. This caused another problem in that every time he found food someplace, he could never find food there again. He had thought that it was just bad luck the first few times it had happened, but after a month he had known that someone was doing it deliberately. He did not know who was making sure to clean out any place he had found food in, but they were entirely too successful. No matter how sneaky he tried to be, if he found food he would never find it there again. What Naruto did not know was that he was completely correct in his guess. Due to the unusual circumstances around his birth, he was hated by large portions of the village. Due to the third Hokage's tenuous protection, no one could really harm Naruto. Instead, a group on shinobi followed Naruto around whenever they were off duty and reported places where Naruto found food to civilians who would then clear them out. More unfortunately for Naruto, they were very successful. Naruto had not eaten in 3 days, longer than he had ever gone without food before. He had considered just letting himself die, but the pain in his stomach had overcome his fledgling suicidal thoughts and had driven him to look for food once more. Distracted by the hunger he felt, he did not notice when he stumbled out from the alley he had been looking into the main streets of his village. Naruto did however notice when he walked into someone on the street because he bounced off and landed on the ground. Wincing, Naruto looked up at the woman he had just bumped into and flinched when he noticed the woman was wearing a hit I-8. A hit I-8 meant the woman was a kunoichi, and kunoichis could give the most painful beatings when provoked. What Naruto did not see however was that the hit I-8 did not have a leaf emblem to represent Konohagakure. Instead, it had a cloud emblem to represent Kumogakure. The woman Naruto had run into was in fact a kunoichi from Kumogakure, sent as part of an envoy to try to make a more lasting peace between the two villages. The woman was annoyed that someone had run into her and turned to yell at whoever had hit her. When she finished turning however she froze. Sitting there on the street was a young boy who looked barely old enough to walk. He wore what looked like a bunch of rags tied together in a cruel parody of a kimono. He was covered in bruises and garbage, only some of which looked new. All the life of a shinobi was hard, and the kunoichi had seen and done many things that made the things done to the child seem like a blessing. Something about her children always tugged on her heart. The kunoichi crouched down so she was on the same level as the child. She reached out to him but paused as he flinched. After a moment she continued to reach out. She gently turned his face towards hers and frowned at the fear she saw on his face. "Hey now, there is no need to be afraid. It was just an accident." Naruto froze in shock. First, this woman had not hit him like everyone else would have. Then she had looked at him with an expression of concern, quite unlike the barely concealed fear, anger and disgust he was used to. He had absolutely no idea how to deal with the situation. "Are you alright? You didn't hurt yourself running into me, did you?" The question caught him off guard. No one ever bothered to ask if he was alright. Unsure what to do with the strange situation and already weakened from hunger, Naruto did the only thing he still could, he fainted. The woman watched the expressions flicker across the young boy's face before he fainted and frowned at what she had seen. She glanced around the street to see if anyone would help but noticed that everyone was either ignoring the boy or looked like they wanted to hurt him. Her frown deepening, she decided that she couldn't leave the boy there alone. After another moment of thought, she picked up the boy. He was unnaturally light to her even though she had to admit that she had never held a boy of his age before. After another glance at the people around her, she decided to bring the boy to the hotel she was staying at. She hoped the team leader and the team medic would know what to do. Scene break. Mabui, the kunoichi who had picked up Naruto earlier, glanced up as she heard a door open. C, the team medic, looked over at her. "Well, how is he?" C frowned as he thought about what he had found. "Frankly, I'm amazed he is still alive." Mabui's eyes widened in shock. "Really? He didn't look that bad to me. Roughed up a lot but not almost dead." C nodded in agreement. "You're right. He is only roughed up a lot. On anyone else though he would be near death." The most pressing problem was starvation. It looks like he hadn't eaten in at least 2 days and only sporadically over the past few months. What he has managed to eat seems to have been garbage, and I'm amazed that he doesn't have any diseases considering how he had been living. On top of all that, he is malnourished, has 3 cracked ribs, a sprained ankle, bruising over large parts of his body, and some large of shallow cuts that I'm amazed aren't infected. Mabui blinked at that. That really did sound very serious, much more serious than what she had thought when she had brought him in. "Do you know why he is in such good condition?" asked B from behind her. Mabui almost jumped at being sneaked upon, but managed to hide a reaction. C frowned but replied. Not really. I can say it definitely wasn't medicine or medical chakra. If I had to guess I'd say it's some kind of Kekkei Genkai. He perked up at that. Really? A has been telling me to look for Kekkei Genkai that we can add to our village. If he really does have one and he really is treated as poorly as it seems he is, we may be able to get him to defect. Mabui perked up at that. She had felt sorry for him and had been racking her brains to see if there had been any way she could have helped him. This offer was far more than she had been expecting, although a Kekkei Genkai was also more than she had been expecting. C was also pleased with this turn of events. As a healer he hated seeing anyone in pain, especially children, but also decided to be a voice of reason. Well, I will have to do more tests to determine if it really is a Kekkei Genkai and not just luck. We also have to talk to him before we can say if he'll defect or not. He nodded his head at C's words. I understand. When do you think he'll wake up? C frowned and thought for a moment. Well, I'm not sure how long he would normally rest, but sleep isn't really helping him, so you can wake him up anytime you want. Just make sure he eats before you question him. I've left some beef broth in there for him. He nodded and motioned for Mabui to follow him into the bedroom where the boy rested. B turned to Mabui and motioned for her to move to the child's side. I'll let you be the one to talk to him because you're the one he remembers. B paused for a moment before continuing. I know you are looking for a way to help the kid and I even agree with your sentiment, so I'll make this offer. If you can get him willing to defect, I'll let him come along, Kekkei Genkai or not. Mabui looked shocked for a moment and B laughed gently. Am I really such a demon that you look shocked when I do something nice? Mabui began to stammer at denial and apology, but B waved her away. I'm just joking. It's no problem. Besides, A did tell me to try to get some people to defect, this just makes it easier for me to do. Mabui nodded her head and seeing that B was finished reached down to try to wake the child. Naruto woke in a daze. He was warm and laying on something soft, feelings he had almost forgotten. He shifted slightly, reveling in the softness and warmth he was feeling, before he smelled something that was better that softness and warmth. He went to sit up but was stopped by a gentle hand on his chest. His eyes quickly followed the hand upwards to see the Kunoichi he had run into earlier smiling at him. Her most distinguishing feature was long white hair that was held away from her face with the heyday he had seen before. In her right hand was a bowl of steaming soup, which seemed to be giving off the smell he had noticed before. Sitting behind the woman, near the window of the room he was in, was a large scarred man with dark skin. He was dressed in white, unlike any shinobi he had seen before. Naruto's eyes quickly tracked back to the soup the woman held, dismissing the man as unimportant for now. The woman noticed his gaze and quickly brought the soup down so he could reach it. Slowly. You haven't eaten in a while and if you eat too quickly you'll get sick. Don't worry, you will get all you can eat. Naruto glanced at the woman warily, but nodded. He had learned never to turn down free food, even if it was poisoned it wouldn't affect him. Reaching out slowly he took a spoonful of the soup and began to eat. The woman watched him for a moment, checking to see if he was following her instructions before nodding. After a few moments of him eating she began to speak. My name is Mabui and I'm a Kunoichi of Kumogakure, behind me is B also from Kumogakure. What's your name? Naruto froze for a moment, spoon halfway to his mouth. They didn't know who he was. If he told them would they stop being so nice? Then he remembered that they said they were from Kumogakure. They might be different and if he didn't tell them they would probably stop being nice. After a moment Naruto moved again to take his next sip. After another moment of thinking he decided to reply. Naruto Uzumaki. Citizen of Konohagakure I guess, but I want to be a shinobi someday. Mabui did not react to his name at all. She just smiled at him and began speaking to him again. That's good, between you and me, being a shinobi can be really awesome. Left unsaid were all the many times being a shinobi was not awesome, that could come later when it wouldn't do quite so much damage to a child's dreams. How are you feeling? Naruto paused again at this, not because he was afraid to answer, but because he was shocked at what his answer was. Good. Really good. Better than I have felt in a long time. Mabui hid her concern at that statement with the ease of long practice. Oh? And just how long is that? How old are you? Naruto flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and shame but answered anyway, after all, these people were nice to him, answering their questions was the least he could do. As long as I can remember really, and I'm 6 years old. My birthday was last month. Mabui suppressed a frown again. She had thought he was maybe 3 when she had met him. Being 6 made the malnutrition and starvation all the more evident. She saw that he was beginning to get uncomfortable, so she switched the topic to something other than him. After a few hours and 2 more bowls of broth, Mabui decided to get a few of the more important questions answered. So Naruto, why don't you let us know where your parents are? I'm sure they are getting worried about you, and I can send someone to let them know that you're alright. Naruto looked sad for a moment which answered her question, but he confirmed it a moment later. Both my parents are dead. I'm an orphan. Seeing that Naruto was finished speaking she decided to gently push a little. What about your guardians or the people at the orphanage? You're really young to be on your own for very long. Naruto looked even more sad, but this time his expression was tinged with anger and resentment. I have no guardians and the orphanage kicked me out last year. They said they needed the room for kids who had a chance of being adopted. His voice dropped to a whisper that was still easily heard by the shinobi in the room. Even if they still had 2 almost empty dormitories and they hadn't gotten any kids in a year. Behind Mabui, B clenched his hands in anger, causing the chair back his hands rested on to groan. Mabui winced at the news despite her best efforts to hold it in. Naruto saw the Kumo shinobi react to his words and cringed in fear. Mabui seeing this motion for B to calm down. I'm sorry Naruto, I didn't mean to frighten you. I'm just angry that anyone could be so cruel to a child. Children are meant to be protected and nurtured whenever possible. Naruto calmed down at her explanation but continued to look sad. Mabui tried desperately to figure out a way to continue the conversation naturally so that Naruto didn't figure out that they were looking for information. Luckily for Mabui, C picked that moment to enter the room. C was an experienced shinobi and could easily read the mood of the room. He realized that the conversation had stalled and decided to start from a new angle. Hello young man, my name is C. I am the medic of this team and as you might have guessed I'm the one who has been treating you. Now I've done what I can for now, but there are some questions I need answered to make sure that I am not missing anything. Why don't we start with your name? Naruto glanced up at the man who claimed to have helped him heal. He was a tall man who appeared to be in his late 20s. He wore baggy black pants, red and white shin guards and a sleeveless black shirt. Over his shirt was a white vest that covered his waist and right shoulder. Akumo 88 held his blonde hair away from his face and finished his outfit. After another moment Naruto decided that this new man was trustworthy and decided to answer his question. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. C nodded at this information before beginning his questions. From what I can see the most severe problem you had was starvation. Can you tell me how long it has been since you last had a meal before this one? And what it was you ate too please? Naruto frowned for a moment but answered anyway. Before this soup I hadn't eaten in 3 days. That's why I bumped into you miss, I was really hungry and I wasn't looking where I was going. Naruto said as an aside to Mabui before finishing answering C's question. What I ate was some stale bread from trash behind the baker's place. I was lucky, it was only 2 days old when I found it. C hid his reaction to that and continued with his questions. Have you been eating out of the garbage for long? When was the last time you had a meal not out of the garbage? When was the last time where you go 3 meals a day? I have eaten out of the garbage ever since the orphanage kicked me out a year ago. No stores or restaurants will let me buy anything. Before that I ate what the orphanage gave me, but they never gave me 3 meals, just a bowl of porridge in the morning and sometimes a bowl of rice at night. C could not believe what he was hearing. Anyone else eating like that would be dead from starvation or diseases he had picked up from the garbage. He was tempted to think that the kid was lying to get free food, but his years as a medic meant that he could almost always tell when someone lied. Unless this kid had Jonin level training on hiding secrets he was telling the truth. I also noticed that you had some injuries, some old and some new, care to tell me how you got them and when? Naruto frowned for a moment as he tried to figure out which injuries might be considered old. I get all my injuries from people beating me up. They know not to go really far, but they can usually get away with bruises. If you could still see the bruises I guess the old injuries were from this morning. The new injuries were from some drunk guys in the alley I was in just before I bumped into you. What do you mean if we could still see them? I mean that I heal really fast. Bruises are usually gone in a few hours. If you could still see them then that meant it was the beating from this morning and not the one from the previous night. You get a lot of beatings. Are they usually so brutal? I guess I usually get a beating 3 to 5 times a day. Most people know to stick to bruises and light cuts, anything more or any weapons used makes the animal masked people show up. C sighed at this information before nodding and doing a medical diagnostic jutsu. After a moment he released the jutsu and addressed Naruto again. I don't see anything wrong with you other than the malnutrition and hunger. For now I think you can have some more solid food. B, why don't you help me prepare some food for Naruto? He nodded and got up. His posture was a little stiff, showing just how angry he was at the information he had heard. B nodded his head and followed C out of the room. Well? B grunted as soon as the door closed. Is it a Kekkei Genkai or something else? C took a moment to answer, mentally checking his conclusion again to make sure it was sound. I'm 90% certain he does have a Kekkei Genkai. If he really is from the Uzumaki clan we even know what Kekkei Genkai it is. Really? What Kekkei Genkai did the Uzumaki clan have? From what I remember of the records we have, the Uzumaki clan Kekkei Genkai included advanced healing and longer than normal lifespan. Uzumaki shinobi were strong opponents and I'm sure the Raikage would be pleased to add such a strong Kekkei Genkai to the village. He finally smiled for the first time since he had heard just what the child in the next room had endured. Alright. Perfect. This means we can take him with very few problems. The people of Konoha obviously don't want him and the people of Kumo will be glad to have him. Don't get ahead of yourself. You still need Naruto's cooperation. Despite our best efforts, if he doesn't want to cooperate with us, helping him will be difficult. He waved of C's concern. No problem. I'll just let Mabui know that she can keep him and he'll be coming with us in no time. C shook his head at B's lack of concern, but also had to agree that Mabui was very persuasive when she wanted to be. B picked up the bowl rice and salmon that C had prepared for Naruto and re-entered the room. Mabui glanced up as she heard the door open. She saw B entering and hoped that they would be able to help Naruto. Seeing Mabui's look of concern, B smiled at her and nodded his head. Mabui smiled in return and returned her attention to Naruto. She knew that the smile meant everything was set up on their end, they just needed to convince Naruto to come with them when they left. B crossed the room and handed the bowl in his hands to Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened at seeing the feast he had been given and after a quick thank you, began digging in. Mabui smiled at Naruto's enthusiasm before beginning her appeal. So Naruto, how do you like Konohagakure? Naruto stopped eating for a moment and looked at Mabui as if she was crazy. This place. I hate it. Everyone hates me and I have no friends. So why don't you leave? Naruto continued to look at Mabui as if she was crazy. Why else would she be asking questions with such obvious answers? Because outside of the village is even more dangerous. Here at least I don't have to deal with bandits. Mabui nodded in thought for a moment before continuing. If you could leave Konohagakure but not have to worry about bandits, to a place where you could make friends, a place where you always got enough to eat, a place where you could learn to protect yourself from any harm, would you? Naruto started nodding madly before she even finished the question. What kind of question was that? Of course he would go to a place where he wasn't hungry or hurt all the time. Just in case she didn't get his message he answered out loud. Of course I would go. Well then, it's lucky that I know just such a place. Naruto's eyes widened and try as he might, he couldn't crush the flicker of hope that appeared in his chest. Really? He whispered, scared to raise his voice in case the noise would cause the offer to disappear. Where? Mabui smiled down at him before replying. Kumagakure of course. If you came to Kumo there would be nobody who would harm you, you would always get enough to eat, you would even be able to make friends. Naruto's chest felt tight, the small glimmer of hope began to swell, making his chest feel like it was going to burst. At Kumo you could even learn to be a shinobi, to fulfill that dream of yours. Naruto could barely contain himself. He wanted to believe that his life could get better. He wanted to crush the desperate hope he had to protect himself from being let down. Really? Really? Mabui replied with a kind smile. It was too much. The feeling in his chest seemed to burst. Tears poured down his face and he wasn't quite sure why they were there. He wanted to accept the offer with his entire body, but he couldn't seem to stop crying to answer. A moment later he was engulfed in another sensation that he knew was unfamiliar with. It was warm and snug against his whole body. He opened his eyes, not remembering when they had closed, to see that Mabui was hugging him. After a moment of shock he lunged forward and began to hug her too, just like all the children he saw hug their parents. As she continued hugging him he finally worked up enough control to begin nodding. I'd like that a lot. He whispered, so softly she might have missed it without shinobi training. Well then, that's what we will do. The two stayed there hugging each other tightly. B just smiled and left the room to give the two some privacy. Seeing C look up he nodded his head in confirmation. C smiled and sat back down to his work. After half an hour Naruto fell asleep, exhausted from the emotions, crying, warmth and full stomach. Mabui left the room to talk about the details of bringing Naruto to Kumo with B and C. How's he doing? Alright. He's asleep now. I guess the day just caught up to him. We should be quick though, I want to be in the room with him when he wakes up so he doesn't freak out. He smirked at her defensive words but decided to let her slide with no teasing. What worries me most is the animal masked people. No doubt those are Anbu. If they decide to intervene there could be problems. The three were silent for a moment thinking about the problem before C slowly began to think out loud. I don't think that will be an issue. He said they only showed up when the beatings got too bad, they didn't stop any of the treatment or help him when he was eating garbage. That means they have orders to protect him but don't actually like him or want to do their job. Mabui picked up his line of thought when he trailed off. That makes sense. No Anbu tried to stop me from taking him into the hotel, it's like they don't care what happens to him. I mean, a foreign shinobi taking a kid into a hotel is cause for concern if anyone cared. C had used the time Mabui was speaking to finish ordering his thoughts and finished with his conclusion. That must mean that the Anbu are hoping we get rid of him in some way. They won't interfere unless they are ordered to, and they'll probably help us by not informing superiors or lying. He spoke up with another worry. What if their superiors catch them anyway? I want to help the kid, but I don't want to start a war if I can help it. Mabui suddenly smiled as a plan came together in her mind. And we won't. We just have to be sneaky about how we do this. But that won't be a problem, shinobi are supposed to be sneaky, right? Scene break. Naruto woke with a start. For a moment he thought that everything that had happened to him was a dream and it almost broke his heart. Then he began to register what he was feeling, warm and full, sensations that he had not felt in a long time. After another moment he opened his eyes. Looking down at him was that woman from before, Mabui. She smiled when she saw he was awake and began to speak softly to him. Hey sleepyhead, how do you feel? Good, happy. That's good. Do you remember my offer earlier? Naruto began to nod before freezing. Did he tell her yes? Was the offer still open if he hadn't? What if they were not willing to help him anymore? Right before he could build himself into a panic, Mabui's voice caused him to calm down. Hey, no need to worry. We'll help you get to Kumo. I was just asking because I need to tell you how we're going to do it. Taking a few deep calming breaths, Naruto felt his heart begin to slow down. Then he remembered something she had just said and asked for some clarification. What do you mean how we're going to do it? Don't we just leave and go to Kumo? Not really. It is difficult for members of a hidden village to move to a different hidden village just in case they had any secret information they can give away. Getting permission will take time we don't have, so we'll have to be sneaky about it. Just think of it as your first mission as a shinobi, leaving an enemy-occupied territory with valuable assets. Awesome. My first mission and I'm not even a shinobi yet. I can't wait. He said excitedly before pausing in embarrassment. Mabui-chan. What's an asset? Mabui chuckled at his enthusiasm. An asset can be important information, such as battle plans or tactics or items of value. Basically it's anything that helps you or your side. Oh sure. That makes sense. Thanks. No problem. Now then listen carefully because this is the plan we're using to get you out of here. The first thing is that we can't let you stay with us at the hotel. If we did it would make it obvious what happened and then someone could try to take you back. Any questions so far? No, I understand. If I am near you too often they'll know where to look to find me. Right. But we also can't let you live on the street for the next week until we're scheduled to leave, so we rented an apartment under an assumed name in a rundown part of the city. You can stay there until we leave. Don't worry about food or keeping it safe, we'll supply food and traps so you can live with no worries. I'll draw you a map when you have to go. Any questions? If anyone sees me in the apartment won't that cause problems? Good point. Before you leave we'll give you some lessons on disguises. You can leave here as Naruto, run around to confuse anyone following you, put on a disguise and go to the apartment. Just be sure to move around outside of the apartment as Naruto for a little while each day. Alright. My first shinobi skill. Don't worry, I'll be the best at sneaking, hiding and disguises, just you wait. Mabui smiled at his obvious joy before continuing her instructions. Alright, I believe you. Now, we are scheduled to leave at noon on Monday, 1 week from now. On that Monday I want you to pack up all the supplies you don't use into the big backpack that's in the apartment. You can use the small backpack for whatever you have that want to take with you or think will be useful. Then I want you to leave the village through the south gate at 10. Leave the big backpack in the apartment, will pick it up. Any questions? What do I do when I leave the village? And what do I do if they don't let me leave? Excellent questions, Naruto. Those are the kinds of questions a shinobi needs to ask on missions. With that kind of thinking you'll go far. Now, to answer your questions. When you leave the village just walk along the road. I'll be along to pick you up when the shinobi that are sent to watch us leave. That means I'll probably get to you at around 1. If they don't let you leave you can hide in an outgoing cart. The guards don't bother to check outgoing carts. Anything else? Naruto silently shook his head, still blushing and unable to speak because of the compliment. Alright then. You rest in here and I'll send and to begin teaching you. And because I won't see you again until we meet on the road, I want to say good luck. Naruto smiled brightly at Mabui as she got up and left the room. Thanks Mabui-chan, I won't let you down. You can count on that. Scene break. Naruto hummed happily to himself as he walked down the road. The past week had been amazing for him. He had warm food 3 times a day, hot showers for as long as he wanted, and a soft, safe place to sleep. The treatment he had to endure whenever he was out on the street had been even worse for him after he had someone treat him kindly, but he had tolerated it by thinking about his new life, his first shinobi mission, and his thought that it was hilarious how easy it was to fool the villagers of Konoha, and had spent his last week pranking as many people as he could. Naruto had thought it would be difficult to leave the village, but it really wasn't. The moment he had told the gate guard he was leaving they let him through. One of the gate guards even gave him 200 rim and a kunai when he promised he wouldn't come back. But now none of that mattered. He was free from the village. He never had to deal with their hate or abuse ever again. He felt as if he was beginning a new life and in a way he was. He checked the position of the sun and guessed that it was close to 1. He smiled as he realized that he would meet Mabui soon. He had missed her during the week in the apartment, but he had followed her instructions exactly. Naruto heard a rustling from the woods next to the road. He turned, his smile getting brighter as his thoughts became reality. His smile crashed a moment later when three large men walked out of the woods instead of Mabui. The three men looked quite rough, like some of the poorer drunks in Konoha. They were dressed in simple brown cloths that looked like they had been burlap sacks in their previous lives. What really caught his attention, however, were the weapons each man held. The man on the left was the biggest of the three. He had a swollen nose that looked like it had been broken one too many times and carried a large crude club. The man in the middle was shorter than his companions and looked heavier than the other two combined. To Naruto, he looked a little like a bowling ball with stumpy arms and legs. He carried a spear that was taller than he was. The man on the right's only distinguishing feature was that he was bald. He was armed with what looked like a farmer's kama. The bald man stepped forward, gave a sinister smile and began to speak. Well. What do we ha here? What you doing walking down this here road? Naruto gulped and tried to figure out what he was going to do. He quickly realized his only real option was to hope Mabui arrived. With that conclusion, Naruto tried to stall for time. I'm just going to another village. My village didn't like me very much. The man grinned in what was supposed to be disarming manner but actually just looked sickly. Oz just is too bad. Now, you look like a nice enough boy, so I'll just tell it to you straight. This here road got's a toll. That toll is anything we want from ya pack. So why don't you just put ya pack on thaw grounds so we can't take the toll? Naruto was freaking out. He knew that he wasn't going to be able to stall for very long. He also knew that he couldn't let his pack fall into enemy hands. A good shinobi doesn't lose assets or mission objectives. Finally he decided on a course of action. His heartbeat slowed and he felt himself calm down. A moment later Naruto removed the bag and placed it on the ground. The bald man smiled and motioned for the other two to search the bag. The two men moved closer to his bag. They reached his bag and the bowling ball man kneeled down to open it up. The man's hand finished undoing the clasp that held the pack shut. His hand reached out to grab the material and time froze. Naruto had all the time in the world to think. He wished Mabui was here, thought it was strange that he wasn't feeling nervous, thought that the trees were too green for this time of year and began planning another prank for the next citizen of Konoha he met. Finally the man opened the backpack and time reversed direction. There was a loud bang and the bowling ball man fell backwards, his hands clutching his eyes. Naruto rushed forward, pulling the kunai from the pocket he had hidden it in. He lashed out at the man with a broken nose, scoring a long thin cut down his leg before he reached the downed man. Putting his entire body into it, he struck at the downed man with his kunai, driving it fairly deeply into the back of his leg. Using both hands he was able to pull the kunai back out and turn it towards the man he had hurt before. The man with the broken nose rushed forward, club raised high. Naruto raised his kunai in a desperate defense. Luckily for Naruto, the now thrashing bowling ball man chose that moment to roll over. The man's sudden movement placed his legs right in the path of the charging man. The man couldn't avoid his partner's legs, causing him to trip. The man smashed into Naruto's raised kunai, tearing it from his grip. Everyone except the bowling ball man froze. Naruto's kunai was embedded to the ring in the man's right eye, his weight driving it deeper than Naruto by himself ever could. Naruto's mind went had killed a man. It was mostly an accident and the man was a bandit trying to rob him, but he had killed a man. After a moment his shock was broken by a scream from the bald man. You killed Haru. I was just gonna steal ya things, but now I'ma kill ya. The bald man rushed at Naruto, kama raised above his head. Naruto glanced around trying to find a weapon. Seeing nothing he could get to and that the man was right in front of him, he jumped backwards. Naruto landed on a root that was coming up from the ground and tripped. The man's kama came down, barely missing his leg. Naruto tried to scramble backwards but hit the tree the root had come from. The man raised his kama for another strike and Naruto desperately looked for a way to escape. There was a dull, wet sound of metal cutting into meat and Naruto flinched. A moment later Naruto looked back at his attacker, confused at the lack of pain he was in. It only took Naruto a single glance to figure out why the man hadn't hit him. In the man's chest, exactly over the location of his heart, was the ring of a kunai. The bald man stumbled backwards and collapsed. The sound happened again and the bowling ball man stopped moaning. Naruto looked around, hoping that he was finally safe. He jumped when he felt arms suddenly grab him. He began to struggle but stopped when the person who grabbed him began to speak. Calm down. There's no need to struggle. It's just me. Mabui. That's right. Are you alright? You're not hurt anywhere, are you? No, I'm not hurt. You came just in time. That's good. Naruto suddenly realized that he was shaking. Mabui tightened her grip on Naruto and placed her head on his shoulder. I just want to say that I'm sorry I didn't get here sooner. I didn't know there would be bandits here. I didn't think anyone would be stupid enough to attack people so close to a hidden village. Is fine. I'm alright. Naruto froze for a moment as a memory came back to him. "Oh Kami, I just killed a man." Naruto stumbled away from Mabui and threw up. He began to tear up as all the emotions from what had happened began to come to him all at once. Mabui just walked over and pulled him into her lap. She held him and began to whisper reassurances in his ear. After 10 minutes of him crying he began to calm down. Mabui felt that he would understand her now that he had calmed down a little and worked to calm him down more. "It's alright. You're doing fine. You're going to be fine. But. I killed someone. I almost died. It's alright. You're alright. You did what you had to protect yourself and that's all that matters." Naruto felt himself tear up again and shook his head angrily. "Why can't I stop crying? Look at me, some shinobi I'll be when I grow up. My first dangerous situation and I break down. Hey now, that's no was to think. You're doing really well. What you're feeling right now is shock, it happens to everyone the first time they kill someone or get into a life-threatening situation. It even happened to me." Naruto continued to cry, but nodded his head to show that he was listening. "In fact, you're doing even better than I was when this happened to me. I was twice as old as you are now and had shinobi training to help me. You must be very brave to be doing so well on your own." Naruto nodded his head again and managed to stop his tears. He sniffled a little but asked a question that was very important to him. "I'll have to do it again, kill people I mean, or get into fights where I might die if I become a shinobi, won't I?" Mabui sighed. She had hoped to get him used to that idea when he had more than just his dream of being a shinobi to rely on. "I won't lie to you. Yes, you will. Being a shinobi is a very dangerous job. Things like this happen all the time. You will face situations where you can die and you will have to kill again. You deal with it. I'll tell you what my father told me when I told him I wanted to be a kunoichi. The life of a shinobi is hard. You will have to face many dangers and death is your constant companion. For me being a shinobi is worth all of those negatives because it lets me fulfill my dream of making the world a better place. In order for you to be a shinobi you need to pick a dream and decide if your dream is worth those negatives." Naruto raises his head and looked into Mabui's eyes. "What's your dream that makes all the terrible things worthwhile?" "I am a kunoichi because I believe that my actions make the world a safer place. Every time I face the dangerous or terrible parts of being a shinobi I remind myself that doing this keeps my loved ones safe. For you need to decide why you want to be a shinobi and if your reasons are good enough for you to put up with all the terrible things a shinobi will face. Many people decide that their reasons aren't good enough and that's alright too." Mabui stopped speaking and began to gently rock Naruto back and forth. She knew that there was nothing else she could say, it was up to him to decide. Finally, after 10 minutes of silence, Naruto spoke up. "I still want to be a shinobi, even with all the bad things that happen." Mabui smiled at him. "Alright. I want you to know that I'll do what I can to help. Now, we've been here for a long time and we need to move. Go get your pack and I'll clean up here." Naruto nodded with a serious expression on his face and went to get his pack. While he was turned to other way Mabui quickly retrieved the kunai and the dead bodies and dragged them into a pile. After a quick glance at Naruto to check that he wasn't looking, she used a high-powered fire jutsu to incinerate the bodies. She turned around and walked over to Naruto, moving quickly so he wouldn't have time to make questions about the bodies. He may have killed someone and decided to be a shinobi, but he was still 6 and she wanted to protect him where she could. "We have to move really fast too. I'm going to carry you. Hop onto my back and hold on tight." Naruto nodded and climbed onto Mabui's back carefully. He held on but quickly tightened his grip as she took off. Scene break. Mabui stopped suddenly on the branch she had just landed on. She glanced back at Naruto who was still clinging to her back. "Almost there, just a little longer. You're doing great. Do you need me to carry you yet?" Naruto smiled tiredly at her, hanging onto a kunoichi's back while she's tree jumped for 6 hours was physically exhausting. That, combined with the emotional exhaustion he was feeling from his first kill, made Naruto very glad he would be able to sleep soon. "I'm alright Mabui-chan, I can hold on." Mabui didn't respond to his words, but she did start moving again. True to both their words, Naruto was able to hold onto Mabui's back until they reached the camp the team set up. He looked up as Naruto and Mabui landed next to the fire. "Hey, what took you guys so long? You should have been here an hour ago, we were just about to go look for you." C glanced up but decided not to contribute to the conversation. Naruto ran into some trouble on the way out of Konoha. It seems that some farmers thought it was a good idea to take up banditry. C got up and moved over to Naruto. "Are you alright? Did they hurt you in any way? Here, let me take a look." C began a medical jutsu but stopped as Mabui continued with her explanation. "He's fine. He's just exhausted from holding on to me for so long. They never got to injure him." He nodded and motioned to a place by the fire. "Well, let him sit down then. We can rest for the night here, we're safe enough." Mabui nodded and brought Naruto over to the fire. He took of his backpack, accepted a bowl of soup that B handed him, and sat down on the spot that B had indicated. Mabui accepted another bowl and sat next to him. C returned to the fire and sat across from Naruto. I'm sorry that you had to go through that, it took longer than we expected for the Konoha shinobi to leave us alone. I'm just glad that Mabui was able to get to you before anything happened. Mabui looked up from her soup when she heard her name. She stopped eating for a moment as she turned to Naruto. I didn't really. C gave Mabui a look of confusion. What do you mean you didn't really? Exactly that. I didn't get there before anything happened. I just arrived in time to stop the last guy. C blinked in surprise. Huh? What do you mean? When I got there Naruto had already put down 2 of the men. I just helped with the last one. Naruto shuffled uncertainly as B and C turned their gaze towards him. Really? What happened? I'm not too sure. I just got there at the end of it. Mabui looked at Naruto and made a gesture signaling that he should tell the story. Naruto looked uncomfortable but did as Mabui asked. I was just heading down the road like you told me to when 3 men came out and told me they were going to take anything they wanted from my stuff. I couldn't let them have my backpack, so I tried to stall until Mabui-chan could get there. C looked like he wanted to ask a question, but held it back after a quick glare from Mabui. They didn't really want to wait, so I put my backpack on the ground and waited for my trap to be sprung. This time Mabui didn't stop C from interrupting the story. What trap? The trap in my bag of course. If anyone opened it without pulling the right string to disarm the trap, they would get ground pepper launched into their face. All 3 shinobi paused at that. They hadn't even thought that Naruto might decide to trap the backpack. How did you learn to do that? And perhaps more importantly why did you set up a trap in the bag? When I lived on the streets I learned to do some traps to protect myself from thieves. My traps got better though when I studied the traps you set up around the apartment. I set up the trap because Mabui told me that assets needed to be protected. Seeing that C was done with his questions for now, Naruto continued with his story. One of the men opened the bag and set off the trap, so I attacked his partner first. I thought that if I attacked while he was distracted by the trap I could take him out, that would mean that I only had to fight the third guy. He praised him for his explanation. Good job. That's excellent planning. Keep thinking like that and you'll go far as a shinobi. Naruto blushed at the praise and continued a little more enthusiastically than he had been before. Well, my plan worked because I did get to hit him. Unfortunately I only cut his leg a little and he was able to keep fighting. I decided to. Whoa. Wait a moment. Did you say cut? How did you cut his leg? With a kunai. I hid it in a pocket so I could use it if I needed it. I'm glad you had the kunai with you, but where did you get it? I know we didn't give you one and all the traps had a complete set of kunai, so you didn't get it from there. One of the gate guards gave it to me when I left. He said that if I promised to never return he would give me 200 rim and some shinobi gear. I figured that I could get some free stuff for doing something I was already doing so I accepted. C looked at Mabui, his confusion clear for her to see. Mabui took pity on C and took over the questions so he could figure out whatever was bothering him. That was certainly good thinking. Who knows what would have happened if you didn't have the kunai. Why don't you continue the story? Alright. Sure. Where was I? Oh, right. When I didn't really hurt the guy I was aiming for I decided to make sure that the guy who was on the ground wouldn't get back in the fight. I ran over to him and stabbed him in the leg. After that things got really difficult. Oh, Mabui gently teased, and what happened before wasn't difficult. Oh no, it was. But after I stabbed the guy my kunai got covered in blood. It was hard to hold and even harder to pull out. I managed by using both hands. Naruto's gaze faded out as he relived those last few moments. Mabui regretted her teasing because it only seemed to have brought up bad memories. I turned around to see the guy I had hurt running right at me. I panicked and held the kunai up, hoping that he would stop. He paused for a moment, his gaze far away, clearly forgetting about everyone else in the camp. In the end I got lucky, I guess. His friend on the ground rolled over and tripped him. He fell right on my kunai. The camp was silent as everyone processed that. B and C both looked at Mabui, the question clear for her to see. She nodded, silently answering their question, causing the 2 men to grimace. After another moment of silence Naruto snapped back to the present. With an obviously false cheerful voice, Naruto continued his story. After that not much happened. I backed away from the third guy, tripped and Mabui saved me. C wanted to let the whole story go because remembering obviously caused Naruto pain, but he had one last question that he needed answered. Naruto, if I may ask, why did you fight so hard to keep the backpack? Why didn't you just give it to them and leave? I couldn't give it to them because they were bullies. Over the past year, when I lived on the streets, I ran into many bullies who beat people up to make them give up. I made a promise to myself that I would never give in. No matter what happened I would fight the bullies with everything I had because if I gave anything less than everything I had, I would be breaking my promise and that's something I'll never do. For a moment the only sound that filled the camp was the crackling of the fire, each person was lost in their own thoughts. That's right. I will never give up. I will fight anyone who uses their strength to hurt people weaker than them. That's my promise. I guess that's the will of fire Konoha always talks about. I wish all shinobi followed such noble ideals. I just hope Naruto can keep his determination when faced with real life. Finally Naruto broke the silence. Besides, Mabui told me that shinobi protected assets, so that's what I did. Naruto. I think you got my message mixed up. Shinobi do protect assets, and assets are anything that can help you or your village, but when I was talking about assets, I meant that you were the asset, not the backpack. Naruto looked greatly confused. Then why did you tell me to fill the backpack with whatever I thought would be useful? Doesn't that mean that I should fill the backpack with assets? Mabui smiled and answered his question. Well, in a way it does. What you didn't know was that sometimes you have to use assets to protect more important assets. In this case losing the backpack would lose you a few assets, but it would have protected you, the more important asset. Naruto digested this information for a moment but continued to look confused. Does this mean that you don't want the assets I collected? I spent a lot of time gathering everything that I could that might help Kumo. Mabui decided to humor Naruto if it helped keep him away from the memory of his first kill. I didn't say that. She said playfully. Why don't you show me what you brought? Naruto smiled happily and dove for his backpack. Great. I'm really proud that I managed to get all this stuff, some of it was really difficult to get. Naruto reached deep into his bag and pulled out a handful of scrolls. He held out the scrolls so that Mabui could examine them. Mabui blinked in surprise, she had expected him to have games or food or even a favorite piece of clothing. Scrolls were entirely unexpected. After a moment she took the scroll from his grasp. As she accepted the scrolls from him Naruto looked up at her expectantly, obviously hoping for a happy reaction. Shaking her head at the strangeness of the situation, Mabui opened the first scroll. She glanced at it, intending to skim it so as not to hurt Naruto's feelings, but ended up stopping as she realized what she was actually holding. After a long moment of staring at the scroll she rolled it up and turned to Naruto. How did you manage to get jutsu scrolls? Jutsu scrolls are always heavily guarded to keep people from stealing them. At Mabui's words B turned back to the conversation. Wait, what? Those are jutsu scrolls. Are they real? The one I read was. I already knew it so I can say the technique scroll was completely accurate. Both B and C moved closer to Mabui, taking a scroll from the pile Naruto had given her. After a moment of examining them, they closed the scrolls and turned to Naruto. I agree with Mabui. How did you get these? This jutsu is only C rank and fairly well known, but it would be guarded heavily anyway. Those are only the newest ones. If you want I have some more powerful ones. Disregarding their questions for a moment Naruto reached deeply into the backpack. He pulled out handful after handful of scrolls, causing the watching shinobi's jaws to drop. After a minute and 24 scrolls Naruto evidently found what he was looking for. With a triumphant yell he pulled an old scroll, yellowed with age, out of the bag and handed it to B. That is the most powerful technique I could find. He opened the scroll and began to read it. His eyes, already wide because of the surprise of the scrolls, widened to the point that Naruto was worried that his eyes would fall out. This is a B rank forbidden technique. I've seen it used in the field and I know Konoha is very protective of it. How did you get this? While B was reading the scroll that Naruto had handed him, Mabui had picked up one of the scrolls that Naruto had tossed aside. As B finished his question she tossed in her own. This scroll is a clan technique. I have never even heard of anyone managing to steal one of these scrolls. How is this possible? B snapped around and took the scroll for Mabui. He glanced over it himself before turning to look at Naruto incredulously. Even if all the other scrolls were D-rank's techniques what they had seen so far made this a treasure trove. Naruto scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Well, when I started going through the trash to find food I noticed that sometimes people would throw out scrolls. I ignored them at first because they weren't food. Later, when winter came around, I took them to try burning to keep me warm. I read one before I started burning them and found that they were jutsu scrolls. He had to shake his head in pure disbelief. This was unbelievable to him. I tried to do some, but I couldn't so I just hid them for when I became a shinobi. When you told me to bring any assets I had I collected the ones I had and spent the week looking for any more. Suddenly B started laughing. C and Mabui quickly followed, leaving Naruto very confused. C, seeing Naruto's confusion, began laughing so hard he fell over. Finally, after 10 minutes they began to calm down. Seeing that Naruto was still confused, Mabui decided to explain a little. I'm sorry Naruto, it's just that jutsu scrolls are so heavily guarded and clan scrolls even more so that we weren't expecting this. You surprised us so we laughed. Really? It was fairly easy for me to get them. I only had to look in the shinobi apartment trash every few days and a few clan incinerators the day before they lit them. It was easy for me. Trust me, this is really unexpected but welcome. I don't think that there has ever been an intelligence mission that has gotten so much long-term useful information. Even if you just had gotten the clan scroll, it would still have been the most successful intelligence gathering mission I have ever heard of. Naruto frowned for a moment before reaching into the bag again. He withdrew another handful of scrolls and held them out for the shinobi to take. But I have dozens of clan scrolls, they were actually easier to get than the regular scrolls because I didn't have to deal with anyone else looking through the garbage. His words proved to be too much for the gathered shinobi to take. The innocent way he went about telling them that he had single-handedly found a massive security breach and had gotten enough information to win a war was hilarious. For the second time that night the shinobi devolved into helpless laughter while Naruto looked on with confusion. Scene break. It had taken a week because they had to slow down Naruto, but the group of shinobi had managed to reach the land of lightning. Naruto could barely handle his excitement. All throughout the week the shinobi had been telling him stories and facts about Kumo that had caused his anticipation to skyrocket. Finally, after 6 hours, the group stopped. B, who had been carrying him, turned to Mabui and handed him off. Free of his burden, B jumped forward and waited for a moment. Another shinobi, dressed almost exactly like C appeared and the two talked for a moment. Finally the new shinobi nodded and gave a signal. 3 more shinobi appeared at the first shinobi's side. B said a few more things to the shinobi. After a moment the 4 new shinobi took up a diamond shape around the original group of shinobi and they continued their journey. After another half an hour of traveling the enlarged group of 8 came out of the mountain pass they had been traveling in. The 4 shinobi who had escorted the group in gave a salute and disappeared. Mabui put Naruto down and pointed to the now visible walls of the hidden village. Welcome to Kumo, the best hidden village in the world and your new home. Naruto looked at the tall walls and felt some new emotion rising in his chest. Naruto smiled. He truly was home. The Kumo ninja. Naruto sat on Mabui's lap and tried to stare at the man who sat across the desk from him without being noticed. The man was unlike anyone Naruto had seen before and Naruto wanted to know more about him. The man Naruto had been staring at was wearing a pair of black workout pants and a long white trench coat that was completely unbuttoned. This was quite strange because the room they were in was actually incredibly cold, so much so that Naruto wished he had a coat of his own. But that was not what fascinated Naruto. The man's clothing, however out of place they were nothing special to Naruto. Konoha was a large trading city and he had seen people dressed in all sorts of strange fashions. What fascinated Naruto so much that he was staring at the man was the man himself. The man was by far the most muscular man Naruto had ever seen. At first Naruto had been staring in disbelief, he had not thought anyone could be more muscular than B, but that had passed 10 minutes ago. Now Naruto was staring in admiration. To Naruto the man's muscles represented his dedication to becoming a strong shinobi, and Naruto was wondering if he would ever be able to become like the man in front of him. Finally the man shifted from his thinking pose. He quickly scanned the group as if to see if anything had changed in the minutes he had been focused on his own mind. Finally he spoke. I honestly am not sure what to say. By all accounts you failed the original mission I sent you on. Not only did you fail to create a lasting peace treaty, but you took a citizen of Konoha without permission. Wars have been started over lesser offenses. The adults in the group began to sweat nervously. Mabui tightened her grip on Naruto as if afraid he would disappear. The man continued his speech. On the other hand you achieved the far more difficult mission of bringing a most likely powerful bloodline to Kumo. You also managed to get more long-lasting intelligence than any intelligence gathering mission I have ever assigned. Mabui relaxed her hold on Naruto a little. She had known the man who was giving this speech for a long time and she was confident that all would be well. After another pause that seemed to stretch on forever the man spoke again. His words seemed to vindicate Mabui's feelings and caused the general tension in the room to drop severely. I guess I have to say good job. While everything could have gone horribly wrong, and still can, the information and possible bloodline you brought back will strengthen Kumo more than an alliance with Konoha ever could. He decided that they were out of danger so he decided to speak. Hey, I'm not even sure that an alliance with Konoha is a good idea anymore. A's face became expressionless. He motioned for B to continue with his reasons. I mean that while they do have the most money and shinobi of any hidden village, from what I saw while I was there, they are actually quite weak. Oh? What do you mean they're weak? From what you just said they sound fairly strong. Well, it's just that the Konoha shinobi I've seen are really weak. I'd say that the majority of their shinobi are actually genin and that our average genin would beat their average genin easily. He nodded his head thoughtfully. And what brought you to this conclusion? When we were walking around Konoha I had my team keep a running count of every shinobi we had seen, their jobs and an estimate of their power levels. Well that is not the most accurate way of taking their measure, I would say that there were 5 genin to every chunin we met. On terms of jonin, I would say there were 4 chunin to every jonin we saw. I turned to C to ask his next question. How were you measuring rank? I doubt they would just tell you the ranks of any shinobi you met. C frowned for a moment before answering the question. Each of us gathered as much information about those we met as we could get, and at the end of the day, we put the information together to get an idea of ranks based on the averages that we found. And you agree with B's assessment of Konoha? If anything, I would think that B's assessment is generous. From what I saw in the list we compiled, if we were to attack Konoha right now, we would win. We would take heavy losses, but we would win. B sat back in his chair. He was silent for a moment as he processed the information before turning to Mabui. And you? What do you think? I have to agree with the others. From what I could see, their shinobi were not nearly as well disciplined, ready for combat, or even as strong as ours are. If we were to attack, I would say the majority of our losses would come from their sheer numbers, their Kekkei Genkai, and their occasional prodigy that Konoha seems to produce. B jumped back into the conversation with more supporting information. I mean, the watchers they sent after us were so easy to evade that I almost did it by accident when I got lost. C jumped in with his own comments. The shinobi they sent to make sure we left their territory got bored and left after 2 hours while we were still in their borders. Mabui also decided to throw in her 2 cents. I also have to say that they are extremely negligent about security. All the scrolls that Naruto retrieved were taken from the trash. Clan secrets and fairly powerful jutsu scrolls were completely unguarded after they were disposed of. A nodded his head in understanding. Do you have the exact numbers and information that you used in estimating the strength of Konoha? C nodded and silently handed over a bundle of scrolls. A quickly read through the scrolls before putting them to the side. He would have analysts double-check the information later. Do you think that they were putting on a poor showing of power as a trap? The 3 adults fell silent as they reviewed their time in Konoha. Naruto frowned for a moment and picked through the scrolls that he still had in his bag. He suppressed a smile at Naruto's antics. He still remembered how bored he was when his father made him sit in meetings like this one when he was Naruto's age. Finally, the silence was broken by an unexpected voice. There it is. Naruto exclaimed while pulling out a scroll from his bag. Mabui blushed in embarrassment at Naruto's behavior and tried to shush him, but Naruto ignored her in favor of holding out the scroll to A. He looked at the scroll and raised an eyebrow. After a moment, he decided to humor the boy and took the scroll. Naruto, now free of his burden, explained why he wanted A to look at that particular scroll. I found that scroll in the Hokage Tower's garbage pile. You wanted to know about the strength of Konoha shinobi, and I think this has some information that will be useful. He sat back in his chair and opened the scroll. He was completely silent as he read through the scroll. When he finished, he put the scroll down and turned all his attention towards Naruto. Are you sure this is accurate? Can you say for certain that this was not left out as a trick? Naruto had become nervous when A's full attention had fallen on him. He took a deep breath to allow him to speak and gave his answer. I guess it is possible it was a trick, but I found this scroll a month before anyone from Kumo arrived. If it is a trick, it has to be really elaborate because I have other scrolls saying the same thing. He nodded his head thoughtfully and held out his hand. Naruto quickly figured out what he wanted and looked through his bag. He began pulling out scrolls and handing them to Mabui to give to A. Finally, Naruto stopped and looked up. Sitting on A's desk were 10 scrolls, including the one he had handed over earlier. A was glancing through them to confirm that the information he was looking for was there. They waited for a minute, the silence broken only by the sound made by the scrolls as they opened and closed. Finally, A put down the last scroll and called in his temporary secretary. Send a message to Kenji Nakata. Tell him to get here with his best analysts as soon as he can. Of course. Right away, Akage-sama. He turned his full attention back to Naruto. I thought that all you had was jutsu scrolls. Naruto sweated nervously, thinking he was in trouble. He hurried to explain. Not really. I have lots of scrolls, anything I could collect really. It's just that everyone was so excited about the jutsu scrolls I forgot about the rest. He sent a quick disapproving look towards B, causing him to duck his head before turning his attention back to Naruto. Is there anything else like these scrolls that you have? Naruto nodded his head hesitantly, unsure of his answer. I have scrolls other than jutsu scrolls if that's what you're asking. He held out his hand again and looked at Naruto expectantly. Naruto got the message and began pulling out scrolls from his pack once again. Mabui looked on, curious at just how many scrolls he seemed to have. He decided to ask just that question. Yo, Naruto. How many scrolls did you fit in that bag? Naruto stopped for a moment and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. As many as I could find, I didn't really count. I just collected all the scrolls that I could and brought them with me in case they were important. He cleared his thought, causing Naruto to jump. He glanced up to see that A was reading some of the scrolls he was turning in. Naruto remembered what he was supposed to do, so he went back to unloading scrolls on A's desk. 10 minutes after Naruto pulled out the last non-jutsu scroll, the door opened and a group of 6 men dressed in what he now saw was standard Kumo ninja attire entered the room. The man in the lead moved to stand in front of A. Kenji Nakata with analyst team air reporting as ordered, Reikage-sama. He looked up from the scroll he was reading and addressed the new arrivals. You're here. Good. The team I sent to make a new treaty with Konoha returned with Naruto, a defector from Konoha, and valuable information for you to go over. The man nodded and focused on the unfamiliar face in the room. You must be Naruto then. My name is Kenji Nakata and I'm head of Kumo's intelligence department. Once you get settled in we'll have a talk about your life in Konoha. It's standard practice with defectors, we want to see if we can get information about your previous village and anything you say can help. It interrupted the conversation. You'll have a second interview later, but I think you'll want to do a quick one now. Why is that, Reikage-sama? Naruto brought along quite a few scrolls that have some valuable intelligence when he defected. It will take you a few weeks to read through most of it and you can have a more in-depth interview when you have, but I need you to analyze a few of these scrolls right now. Kenji glanced at the massive pile of scrolls on the desk and nodded his head. Fished out the scrolls Naruto had originally given him and the assessment on the Shinobi B's team had met. Kenji looked at the information before passing it to his team. He turned and focused on Naruto. I have to ask, is he reliable as a source? He could be trying to feed us false information so we make a mistake. C jumped to Naruto's defense immediately. He is reliable. I personally checked his medical information and corroborated his story with over 20 random citizens and shinobi I met. Unless all of Konoha was in on putting a cover story together, he's telling the truth. Kenji nodded his head and addressed Naruto. I'm sorry that I had to ask that, but I have to be careful. Naruto nodded his head. I understand. Even in Konoha, the village's safety always came first. Kenji smiled at Naruto, knowing that he would get more information if he was friendly and continued with the conversation. Thank you for being so understanding. Now then, why don't you tell me how you came across this information? Naruto nodded and began his story once again. He knew that the more information he gave them the bigger an asset he would be and the more they would protect him. He trusted Mabui's promise that they would let him join Kumo, but figured that every little bit helped. He finished his explanation and waited for the next question. That's very interesting. Do you think that the information was planted? It seems extremely convenient that it was so unguarded. This time B spoke up. It is, of course, possible that the information was planted, but it seems unlikely. From my own observations I would say that security in Konoha is really lax. Naruto decided to contribute more information. I don't think someone left these out for me to find. I've been finding them for over a year before I left. Kenji nodded thoughtfully. It wasn't likely that the scrolls were planted because of how long it had been happening, but it wasn't impossible. The next question came from one of the analysts. Do you have the rest of the scrolls? They seem to be missing the months of February and June. Naruto ducked his head in embarrassment. No. Those are the only ones I had. I probably had them, but there is a good chance that I burned them. The analyst looked so taken aback that Naruto hurried to explain. When I originally took them I was planning to use them to start fires so I would have warmth over the winter. I took all sorts of scrolls and burned anything that wasn't a jutsu scrolls because I had no need to keep them. Mabui looked up and asked a question that had been bothering her. If you had been using scrolls to start fires, why do you have so many left? Especially old ones. Fires were really noticeable, so I tried not to use them unless I really had to. Then it became warm again, but I continued collecting them in case I couldn't find any in winter. When I started using them for fires again I would just grab a handful. I didn't go from oldest to newest or anything like that. Mabui nodded and the analyst shook his head. After another moment the analyst that had come in last asked another question. I'm really sorry, but I'm used to analyzing battle reports. I fail to see how these contain useful information and what I should be analyzing them for. I turned towards Kenji and glared at him. Kenji was quick to give an explanation. You said to bring my best analysts and he really is good with battle reports. He's just new to the rest of his job. Kenji turned to glare at the analyst who had spoken. Something we will be fixing as soon as we can. The analyst gulped, knowing that he had drawn the ire of his superiors. The analyst next to him decided to help out by explaining what they were looking for. These are reports of missions rejected by Konoha. What is really strange is that there are so many. I get that, but I still don't get what I'm supposed to be looking for. The Cold believed that the man was one of his best analysts and made sure that everyone knew it. Kami, help me, this is one of our best analysts. Naruto could figure it out and he's 6. Naruto decided to keep quiet about the fact that he had actually misunderstood what the scrolls were about. He had thought that the scrolls were showing the ranks of the shinobi who had completed each mission. Kenji picked up the explanation so that he could calm down. Missions are the lifeblood of a hidden village. Any mission that is turned down weakens the village by losing clients, money and damaging the village's reputation. No village would turn down a mission unless it really had to. The analyst nodded his head, but his expression still showed his lack of understanding. Kenji sighed and questioned whether or not the analyst really should have the job he currently had. Finally he decided to just spell out what he should have seen for himself. If a village turns down a job it is because they are unable to take the job. This can mean that the job is too difficult for them to take or that they don't have enough shinobi to take the job. The analyst finally began to understand what Kenji was talking about. He blushed in embarrassment and decided to show that he wasn't a complete idiot. Oh, I get it. The problem is that Konoha has the most shinobi of any hidden village, so that means that they don't have enough skilled shinobi to fulfill all these jobs. The ranks are mostly A and B, so that means they have a lack of chunin and jonin who normally do these jobs. Kenji ignored A's muttered finally and finished his explanation. Yes, exactly. Now we don't know how many missions were accepted and what rank they were, but based on the average number of missions we get a month at each difficulty and action reports that mention Konoha shinobi, I would say that conclusion is accurate. I would also have to say that based on how many months this has been going on this is a problem that's not really being fixed. That lets us draw many more conclusions. A different analyst decided to speak up. I will be able to draw a more complete conclusion when I can check the records and look at more data, but I would say that means the average Konoha shinobi is a genin, and from the C ranks in there, not very strong ones. Kenji turned to Naruto and asked him an important question. Over the past 2 weeks, when B was in Konoha, was the amount of shinobi present different than what is normally there? Everyone in the room focused their attention on Naruto. He knew this was a very important question, so he took his time thinking about his answer. Finally he nodded his head and responded. You know there were fewer shinobi around than there usually were. It made moving around easier because there weren't any shinobi hopping along the rooftops. All the analysts in the room frowned at his response before one gave a tentative response. Could be they took in a lot of missions. Maybe they fixed whatever this problem was and decided to show they were still reliable. Kenji shook his head and offered a counter-response. I don't think so, we would have noticed because our missions would have lowered. Maybe it was a show of force. Saying that they are so strong they don't need many shinobi to defend their village. The analysts fell into a group and began to discuss the possibilities. After a moment Kenji turned to A. We'll need to analyze more information before we can have a definite theory. Give us a week to go over the other scrolls and our own information. The nodded and motioned for the analysts to take the scrolls. Fine. I expect a full report in 1 week. I need to know if Konoha is actually weak or not. Kenji, stay for a moment, I need to ask you a few questions. The analysts moved over to the table and took all the scrolls. They left the office as a group, still discussing their ideas. Finally A turned his attention back to Naruto. I want you to know that you did good work. You have great instincts to have brought that information. If you keep it up you'll go far as a shinobi. Naruto beamed at the praise he received. He was glad that so many people believed that he could fulfill his dream. For your effort in gathering this information from a semi-hostile hidden village and returning it to Kumo safely, I am awarding you with a successfully completed A-rank mission. That means you will receive a sum of 500,000 rim. They paused for a moment to let this sink in. Naruto was shocked and excited, this was more than he had ever believed he would have. Continued when he saw that Naruto understood what he was saying. You will also receive citizenship in Kumogakure after the standard 3-month waiting period. As you are an orphan you will also get an apartment free of charge until you become a genin or reach the age of 16 and a monthly stipend of 2,000 rim. Naruto was smiling widely. Part of him had believed that Kumo would be the exact same as Konoha and he was relieved that he was obviously mistaken. Smirked at Naruto's obvious joy and decided to give his last announcement. Also, because you were the one to retrieve those jutsu scrolls that will help the village, I will have a copy of each scroll made for you to keep. You can start your own library with them. Just make sure that you have someone with you when you start learning them, for your safety if nothing else. Naruto nodded his head happily. This was beyond his wildest dreams. He was accepted in Kumo and was well on his way to becoming a shinobi. Thank you very much Raikage-sama. I will become a great Kumo shinobi, I won't let you down. Smirked at his enthusiasm. Now then, the apartment I am giving you is apartment 5D in building number 10. I believe Mabui can help you find it as she lives in apartment 5A in the same building. Naruto's eyes grew huge and he looked up at Mabui. She smiled and nodded her head, happy that Naruto was being accepted and that she would be able to keep an eye on him. I'll take you there later, after the Raikage dismisses us. Addressed Mabui with his next comment. Then you can take him now. The two of you can go for now, just remember to come back next week when the analysts are giving their reports. You can pick up the apartment key from my secretary on your way out. Naruto smiled at A and jumped up. Mabui followed him up a moment later. At Mabui's prodding Naruto bowed to A and followed her out. The door closed and the 4 men remaining in the room waited for a moment. After a minute of silence Kenji spoke. Are you sure that's a good idea Raikage-sama? Shouldn't we restrict his movements until we're sure of his loyalty? He responded to his chief of intelligence gathering. I understand your concern, but I am reasonably sure that we can trust his loyalty. It's possible that he's really a deep cover agent, especially because of that damned Yamanaka clan, but it's extremely unlikely. C jumped in with supporting information. Like I said earlier, his medical history checked out and we verified his story from many different sources. I also gave him many cognitive tests that we have used to find Konoha sleeper agents before and he turned up clean. We will have to do a more in-depth examination to be sure, but I think it's safe to assume he's clean. Kenji frowned for a moment but nodded. I'll want those tests done, we can have them as part of the physical we give him, so he doesn't get suspicious. We should also check for seals, Konoha had some Fuinjutsu masters that we need to watch for. I nodded his head. Agreed. I'll send over the order to the medical examiners. C raised the next concern. Are you sure it was wise to give him the Jutsu scrolls? He is very young and he could cause a lot of damage with them. I waved away that concern. Not really. I looked through them and they were mostly E and D rank Jutsu. Useful on the road but not very destructive. There are a couple of C rank and even one B rank Jutsu, but they require training and more chakra than a 6-year-old can use. C shook his head at that. I wouldn't be so sure of that. I'm a chakra sensor and I can definitely say that Naruto has more chakra than any 6-year-old I have ever met. Hell, he has more chakra than some jonin I know. I almost thought he was lying about his age, but my medical scans confirmed it. I frowned at this news. Finally he shook his head. Well, that is highly unusual, he still needs training to use any of those jutsu. Do you know why he has such high chakra reserves? Not really. Part of it could be his Kekkei Genkai, the Uzumaki clan always did have larger chakra reserves than most people, but that wouldn't account for all of it. The physical should give us more information to work with. He decided that there was a much more important issue than whether or not Naruto was a sleeper agent. Are we going to war with Konoha? Because from your earlier statements it seems that you want to go to war with Konoha. He was silent for a moment before shaking his head. I don't think so. Even if all the information we got is true, we would still be weakened enough that we might be attacked. I just want to know because I need to know how much of a threat everyone is and how much my efforts to make our village stronger are working. He sighed in relief. Good. If you had really wanted to I would have fought, but I really want to avoid a war if I can. He nodded his head thoughtfully and dismissed the shinobi gathered before him. He leaned out of the door and addressed his secretary. Clear my appointments for today, I don't want to be disturbed unless there is an emergency. His secretary nodded her head. Of course Reikage-sama. No one shall disturb you. He turned back to his office. Good, he muttered. Because I have a lot to think about. Scene break. Hokage's tower, Konohagakure. Report. Snapped Sarutobi. The shinobi standing in front of his desk snapped to attention and began to speak quickly. We have confirmed that the boy has definitely left the village. From what we can tell he left from the south gate roughly a week ago. The guards on duty claimed that he attacked them by surprise and hurt them badly. He supposedly almost killed them but left when reinforcements arrived. The Hokage shook his head angrily. That is an obvious lie. No child completely untrained in any way could possibly take down two Chunin, even from a surprise attack. Excuse me Hokage-sama, well I agree with you that no untrained child could have attacked and defeated two Chunin, we all know that that thing is no child. The Kyuubi. A shinobi was interrupted when the Hokage slammed his fist into the table. Enough. My laws are still in effect. Finish that sentence and I will not hesitate to fulfill the mandatory punishment. The shinobi cowered away from the Hokage, suddenly remembering that the man in front of him was known as the shinobi no Kami for a very good reason. The Hokage calmed down a little and continued as if he had not been interrupted. Besides, any attack would have been reported and any medical attention that resulted from the attack would have generated paperwork. There is absolutely no record of anything happening, so it is an obvious lie. I want those men to spend some quality time with Ibiki-san. If they are not in his care within the next hour you will take their place. The shinobi shuddered at the thought of spending time under Ibiki's care. Of course, Hokage-sama. It will be as you say. The shinobi quickly sent a mental apology to the two Chunin he was going to pick up before leaving in a plume of smoke. He knew that their story was too wild to believe and he hated to punish the two men, but it was better them than him. The Hokage turned to his Anbu bodyguards. Leave me for now. No one disturbs me unless there is at least an A-class emergency. The only response he got was a nod as his bodyguard left the room. Sarutobi activated a seal on his desk to make sure that no one could eavesdrop on his thoughts and turned to face the painting of the Yondaime Hokage hanging behind him. How did it come to this? You wanted your son to be treated as a hero, but the villagers just drove him out. What would you do if you were still here? Sarutobi sighed to himself and shook his head. He knew exactly what his late successor would have thought. The Yondaime had loved the village with all his heart, but he had loved his family even more. I must make things right again. When we find him I will make sure that he is cared for personally. I won't leave his well-being to my Anbu or the civilian council. Sarutobi promised. But first, we have to find you. Sarutobi took a piece of paper and a pen and began writing order. Let's see, Anbu unit sweeping the city in case he returns, all ninja squads ordered to look out for him and a return on site order. He paused for a moment. That might not actually be the best idea. If he finds somewhere that treats him well he won't want to be taken back. Then just an information gathering side mission unless he is in danger when found. Maybe a money reward will make sure I actually get results and a punishment for any lies. Yes, that will work. He put down his pen but hesitated to send the orders out. Finally he picked up his pen and started on a new sheet of paper. Send a message to Jiraiya as well. He'll be a great help on the search. Finally the Hokage put the orders in his outbox and moved to call in his secretary. I'm sorry Naruto. I just hope that you are alright until we can find you. Scene break. The Forgotten Room and a Forgotten Base Konohagakure at the same time. Report. Snapped Danzo. The root agent began speaking in a dull monotone. We have investigated as per your orders and know that the Kyuubi has definitely left Konoha. We are unsure why but believe it to be because of a meeting between the Kumo delegation and the boy. So they took out weapon. Danzo growled. It is possible but not likely. The root agent replied. Root forces followed the Kumo delegation during their stay in Konoha and on their journey until they left Hai no Kuni. There was no contact except for the initial meeting between the delegation and the boy. Then why do you think the Kumo delegation is involved? The boy left the same day that the delegation did. It is believed that he latched onto them when they showed him kindness and he decided to follow them when they left. Sources indicate that he left from the wrong gate, which we believe to be a misdirection, either on his part or on wrong information given to him by villagers. Danzo frowned. Do we know where the boy actually is at this time? The root agent bowed his head. No, Danzo-sama. He had proven in the past to be quite adept at hiding and we never had a full-time watch on him because he already had an Anbu guard and the risk of being found was too great. The best we can tell is he ran into some bandits outside of the city. Was he killed or just taken as a slave? As far as we can tell neither. Their bodies destroyed by a Kaiten technique but that is standard operating procedure for any bodies found by patrols. Their camp was unused so we know that all the bandits were killed and the boy's body was not found. He either escaped or was rescued but we have no other information. Danzo was silent for a moment as he gathered his thoughts. This may be a blessing in disguise. The boy was always too dangerous without proper training so it is better that he is outside until then. I want all root agents with missions outside the village to look for him. If he is found, he is to be captured and brought back for training. The root agent bowed and left the room to relay the orders to the other root agents. Danzo sat back in his chair. After a moment he smiled as he finished thinking through the consequences of this occurrence. Yes, this will do nicely indeed. If I find him, I can train him without Sarutobi's interference. If I can't find him, he won't be a danger to the village and if he is in another village, I have grounds to demand a war. This will be perfect. While Danzo had not expected Naruto to run away he knew that he could make the best out of the situation. Danzo silently thanked the villagers for making the boy's life so hard, it made indoctrinating him into root that much easier. Then he turned back to the present and faces the root agent across the desk from him. Report. Scene break. The Raikage's tower, Kumagakure. Well? Asked. C hesitated for a moment before replying. Well, it's a lot more than we thought it would be. Oh? I guess we should start with the physical. Naruto shows classic signs of malnutrition and starvation. The medics agree that it is quite bad but should have been a lot worse. Almost all the damage can be reversed because it's still early, but he may never reach his full height. A nod at his head, the news was not unexpected. He motioned for C to continue. The tests also showed that the reason he is so well off is indeed because he has a Kekkei Genkai. At this A perked up. Again this was not exactly unexpected, but it was welcome news nonetheless. This is confirmed. C nodded his head. Indeed. He definitely has the Uzumaki Kekkei Genkai. We searched the records and found out that the Kekkei Genkai involves increased longevity, massive chakra reserves, increased healing, a strong water affinity, and something called chakra chains. I raised an eyebrow at this. It sounds like an extremely powerful bloodline. C nodded his head again. It is, and Naruto has an extremely powerful form of the bloodline. Based on our projections Naruto may have a lifespan of about 400 years. He lost his composure for the first time in the conversation. His eyes widened and he began spluttering. Fu. 400 years. C nodded his head. He had been just as shocked when he had read the predictions. Part of the Kekkei Genkai is the ability to quickly and efficiently heal injuries. This apparently included age to a large degree. Based on his healing factor 400 years may actually be conservative. He shook his head slowly in disbelief. 400 years. That's ridiculous. C smirked to himself. While the news was impressive it was not nearly as shocking as some of the other things they had found. What is really ridiculous is his healing factor. During testing we gave him a cut to the arm that would have taken a week to heal on its own. It was gone in under 3 hours. I smiled at this news. Longevity was a great power, but only in the long term, as the longevity brought experience. Advanced healing, however, was useful to any shinobi. As I mentioned before, he also has extremely large chakra reserves, enough that he currently has more than some jonin. Part of that is from his bloodline like I thought, and part of that is from the surprise we found. I frowned and motioned for C to elaborate, but C just continued with his report. His water affinity is actually strong enough that he was able to learn a water jutsu in just 1 hour. It was only an E-rank jutsu, and someone with no water affinity could learn it in well under a day, but it is still impressive, especially with no prior training. And the chakra chains. C frowned but continued his report. Unknown. Our records just state that part of the Kekkei Genkai is chakra chains, but there is no explanation, and Naruto has no idea what it could mean. I nodded slowly before smiling. While it is unfortunate that we don't know about the chakra chains, it is still an impressive Kekkei Genkai. I think I will have to give your team a bonus for finding him. Thank you Reikage-sama, I know I won't turn down a bonus. Seeing the Reikage's smile fade away, C continued with his report. We had the in-depth tests Kenji wanted done, and as far as we can tell Naruto is clean. No results showed anything that would indicate he is a sleeper agent. The most we found was the beginnings of a shadow personality that was forming to deal with the negativity he faced in Kumo. Shadow personality? Would it stop him from becoming a shinobi? No. Even if the shadow personality was completely formed, he would still be able to be a shinobi. As it is unformed and will most likely fade away with time and kindness. I nodded his head. He really wanted Naruto as a shinobi, and he was glad that nothing would prevent him from getting his wish. C looked down at the report for a moment. As he looked up, a wicked smirk formed on his face. When A saw the smirk, he knew that he would finally learn what the surprise was and that it would be shocking. During the medical exam we checked for any seals as Kenji asked. At first we didn't find anything, but later, when he channeled chakra to learn the water jutsu, a seal appeared on his stomach. C was tempted to draw out the suspense, but he saw that A was getting impatient. C decided against pushing his luck and skipped a lot of the build-up he had planned to use. We had jutsu masters look over the seal. It is hopelessly complex, and they can only barely begin to understand it, but from what they can tell, it is a Bijuu containment seal. I blinked for a moment before that statement sunk in. When it did, he stood up so suddenly that his desk went flying. What? C ducked his head to avoid the desk and quickly answered. A few jutsu masters think it is a highly advanced containment seal designed to hold a powerful Bijuu. It's even more powerful than B's seal. Based on the complexity of the seal, the area Naruto is from and the age of the seal, we believe that Naruto is the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. He fell back into the chair as if the strength had suddenly left his legs. After a moment he raised his hand and began rubbing his eyes tiredly. C remained silent, he had not expected the Reikage to react so badly to the news. Finally A let out a sigh and dropped his hand. Is it possible that this is a mistake? No Reikage-sama, at least not really. The seal is a containment seal designed to hold massive amounts of demonic chakra. Unless he contains another Bijuu or demon that no one has heard of, he most likely contains the Kyuubi. He suddenly became more animated. He stood up again and began to pace around the room, muttering under his breath. C righted the desk that A had thrown earlier and began picking up the papers that had been on the desk. The Reikage broke the silence so suddenly that C froze. Who else knows about this? C gave a quick shake of his head to get himself back in motion and answered the Reikage. Just the Fuinjutsu master, the head doctor, B and myself. B? Yes, when the Fuinjutsu master discovered the seal he called in B to try to see if he could sense the Bijuu inside. He ended up being unable to because the seal is so tight no recognizable chakra is being released. He fixed his gaze on C with such intensity that C began to get uncomfortable. Does that mean Naruto will be unable to act as Jinchuriki? The Fuinjutsu masters think that the seal will loosen up when he is older and more able to handle demonic chakra. They are unsure if it will continue to loosen to the point that it will unravel or if it will stop at any point. Is this a risk to the village? Will I have to worry about the Bijuu breaking free from the seal and going on a rampage? C quickly shook his head and waved his hands. No. Nothing like that. They said that even if it continues to unravel to the point the seal will fail, it would take nearly 80 years to become a danger. There is plenty of time to figure out a solution if it is even a problem. He nodded his head and let out a small sound of relief. He would not have liked to banish Naruto, especially with all the information he had given them, but he would have if Naruto was a danger to the village. He smiled as he realized just what this news meant for Kumo. This is excellent news. With 3 Jinchurikis, 2 of which hold the most power of the Bijuus, Kumo will rise to be the strongest hidden village in no time at all. After a moment his smile faded and he became a little more serious. Does Naruto know about the Biju he carries? C also let out a sigh of relief. He knew that A would have done anything to protect the village and he was glad that, at least in this case, nothing would happen. A little. He didn't know anything about it until the Fuinjutsu master started poking around. He overheard a little about Jinchuricus and Bijuus before I moved the conversation to a different room and he can probably piece things together. Irakage nodded his head. Alright. Here are my new orders. First, when you leave here I want you to bring Naruto and B to my office. It will be better if he knows about the Biju inside of him now. C nodded his head to show that he understood. Then, when you have got them, I want you to go to the doctor and the Fuinjutsu master and tell them to keep Naruto's Biju quiet. If Konoha finds out we took their Jinchuriki they might kick up a fuss and I don't want to start a war, at least until Naruto masters his Biju's power. Hi, Raikage-sama. Your will be done. Exclaimed C before he disappeared, leaving only and fading after image in his place. I shuffled his papers around, grateful that C had cleaned up after his outburst and waited for his orders to be carried out. He didn't have to wait long, 10 minutes after C departed Naruto and B walked into his office. I took a deep breath and put on a smile. He wasn't quite sure how to tell a child that they had a demon sealed inside of them, but he was fairly sure that being less intimidating would help. He noticed the effort that A was putting into his smile and realized what the conversation would be about. He grimaced but nodded to his brother to tell him that he understood and would help. I turned to Naruto. After a moment to gather his thoughts he began his explanation. I'm sure that you are wondering why I called you here. Naruto thought for a moment before replying. I guess it has something to do with the tests the doctor did today. I nodded his head. C was right, Naruto was quite intelligent. That's right. I want to start by saying that nothing is wrong. You can still stay in Kumo and you can still become a shinobi when you're old enough. Naruto let out a sigh of relief. With his two biggest concerns out of the way he could relax. If nothing is wrong with me then it has to do with the seal that's on my stomach. Right. He blinked in surprise but nodded his head again. Correct. That seal is extremely special. In fact, there are only 9 people with similar seals in the entire elemental nations. Naruto's face crunched up in thought. After a moment he asked a tentative question. Does this have anything to do with the Jinchuriki everyone was talking about? He frowned for a moment before replying. Yes. Yes it does. To understand what a Jinchuriki is, you first need to know what a Biju is. To put it simply, a Biju is a massive construct made of pure chakra in the shape of an animal. These beings are enormously powerful and usually filled with rage. He decided to cut in and add a few more details. Biju are ranked by the number of tails they have. The more tails the stronger they are. Despite that, even the weakest one, the Ichibi, is stronger than any shinobi. They are walking forces of nature. He continued with his explanation. Biju are incredibly dangerous and can cause massive amounts of damage in very short periods of time. The Biju were so powerful and dangerous that they couldn't be killed or even defeated with regular ninjutsu, so instead people began to use Fuinjutsu to make sure that they couldn't harm anyone. Naruto's eyes widened and he looked at his stomach again. Fuinjutsu? Does that mean that there is a Biju in my stomach? I paused for a moment and thought. It is a bit more complicated than that, but essentially yes. The more tails a Biju has, the harder it is to seal. Biju with many tails are too strong to be stored in objects and instead must be stored in humans. Those humans are called Jinchuriki. Naruto stared at his stomach in fascination and awe. After a moment I realized that he would get no reply and continued with what he wanted to say. Jinchuriki often become extremely powerful shinobi. The Biju inside them gives them advantages that other people do not. On top of that, if you are strong enough, you can eventually gain access to the Biju's power and use it as your own. Naruto started to bounce up and down, but quickly stilled himself. He was excited, but he knew that shinobi did not bounce up and down when they were excited. That's awesome. Which Biju do I have? What special powers do I get? He laughed in relief. He had been worried that the kid would not take the news well, but it seemed his fears were unfounded. You hold the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the last and most powerful of the Biju. Unfortunately we don't know what powers you will get from your Biju, we don't know any Jinchuriki who have used the Kyuubi's power in the past. When you are older and can access the Kyuubi's chakra we can find out. That's so cool. I'll be a really powerful and unique shinobi. I'll even be able to make my own techniques. I let Naruto celebrate for a few moments. Then he made a motion to tell Naruto to calm down. After a moment he did and the Raikage continued. I know that you're excited and you have every right to be, but you have to keep your Biju a secret. What? Why? Isn't being a Jinchuriki a good thing? I paused for a moment before deciding to go on a small tangent. It is in Kumo. What do you mean? Why wouldn't it be elsewhere? Most people don't understand Fuinjutsu. They can't believe that a little ink can hold back powerful creatures like Biju. That makes them nervous and scared. When people are scared they often do bad things, and a Jinchuriki's life can be difficult. Naruto's eyes widened in understanding. You mean the villagers? They were so mean to me because I was a Jinchuriki. The grimaced but nodded. Yes. I believe so. Happily though, here in Kumo we are more used to Jinchuriki. People might be a little wary around you, but they won't harm or belittle you. They might even end up honoring you if you can gain full control over your Bijuu. A Jinchuriki with full control over their Bijuu is a powerful force for any hidden village. B added to the conversation. Naruto's face had fallen when he heard that Jinchuriki were treated badly, but when he heard B's encouragement his head snapped up. Alright then. I will master my Bijuu's power and become the most powerful shinobi in Kumogakure. I won't fail. B smiled at that declaration. Naruto was so full of enthusiasm and confidence that it was hard to imagine him failing. I'm glad to hear that. Now then, I think we got a little off topic. The reason I want you to keep quiet about your Bijuu is not because of the villagers of Kumo, it's because of the other hidden villages. Huh? Why would they matter? I snorted in amusement before answering. Like I said before, Jinchuriki are extremely powerful. Other villages knew that we had another Jinchuriki they might decide to attack before you can learn to use your Bijuu's power to defend the village. Even if they don't attack, they might send assassins or people to capture you, so you can't strengthen our village. But let that sink in for a moment. He was glad to see that Naruto didn't look scared, instead he looked determined and a little angry. I will master my Bijuu's power really quickly. No one is going to damage my new home. I have already sent orders to those who know that you are a Jinchuriki to keep quiet. You are not to tell anyone about it unless they already know or I give you permission to tell them. Do you understand? Yes, Reikage-sama, I can only talk about my Bijuu with people you say I can and people who already know. Naruto paused for a moment, his face a picture of indecision. Reikage-sama. Can I get permission to tell Mabui-chan about my Bijuu? The Reikage raised an eyebrow but nodded his head. I think that would be alright. I was planning to have Mabui-san become my secretary, so I am confident she can keep a secret. Naruto jumped up in excitement before catching himself and sitting again. That's great. The Reikage chuckled a little before continuing with his orders. There is one other new person who you can talk about your Bijuu with. There is a girl named Yujito Nai. If you meet her you can tell her about your Bijuu. Why? You can talk to Yujito because she is the same as you. Naruto's face scrunched up in thought again. After a few moments his eyes widened and he gasped. Does that mean that Yujito? He nodded his head again. Yes. Yujito is one of the Jinchuriki we have in Kumo. She holds the Nibi no Nikko and can help answer questions you might have. I'm sure that Mabui or B will be happy to introduce you to her. Naruto smiled at the possibility of making new friend. B decided to jump into the discussion again. You can also come to me if you have any questions about being a Jinchuriki. I'm Kumo's other Jinchuriki. I hold the Hachibi and have full control over his chakra. Naruto looked up at B with hero worship in his eyes. Really? You have full control over your Bijuu? That's amazing. Can you help me get control over the Kyuubi? B reached out and ruffled Naruto's hair. Of course I can. I'll help you master your Bijuu when you're old enough to handle its power. Of course that can take some time, but until then I'll help you get stronger. Naruto jumped up again in joy, but this time didn't immediately force himself to sit down again. Alright. That's awesome. I'll get super strong and master using the Kyuubi's power really fast now. Then B both chuckled at his enthusiasm. Finally the Reikage spoke again. Alright. I know that I gave you a lot to think about so I'll let you go. Just remember to keep your Bijuu a secret. Naruto tried to give the salute that he had seen other shinobi give when acknowledging orders. Right. No problem Reikage-sama. I won't let you down. He waved his hand and let the two leave his office. He was glad that Naruto had taken the news so well. Maybe he wasn't so bad with kids after all. He glanced down at the stacks of papers on his desk. He grimaced because he realized that he was now behind schedule. Kami, he hated paperwork. He couldn't wait to make Mabui his secretary, then she would take care of this paperwork for him. Scene break. Naruto ran home as fast as he could. He darted in between people, weaving through the crowd as fast as his legs could carry him. He was so excited about the fact that he was a Jinchuriki that he felt that he needed to run or else he would explode. When he had been called into the Reikage's office earlier, he had thought that his good luck had finally run out and that he would be sent back to Konoha. Instead he had been told that they knew why people hated him and that not only that they did not care, but that he was important because of it. He finally allowed himself to believe that this was not a dream or temporary vacation and that he actually had a new life. Finally, Naruto broke free from the crowds and sprinted into his building. He ran up the steps, fumbled around in his pocket for his key, and then opened his door. He walked into his apartment and allowed himself to relax. The room he saw was empty and bare. To many, it would seem to be ugly or plain. To Naruto, the room seemed to be the greatest place on the planet because it was his home. The room had plain white walls, an unpolished wooden floor and no furniture to be seen. He had not gotten anything for it yet because he just couldn't believe that he would actually live here permanently and he was used to worse. Now, however, that he allowed himself to actually believe that this would be his home, he decided to change that. Naruto sped through his apartment, checking each room to make sure that he knew exactly what he needed and where it would go. When he was done, he left the apartment and raced down the hall to Mabui's apartment. He paused in front of her door and took a moment to calm himself. He knew that Mabui could get annoyed when he was really hyper and he didn't want to annoy his first friend. After a minute of deep breathing he allowed himself to knock on her door. Even with his newly calmed state Naruto fidgeted with excitement as he waited for Mabui to open her door. After what felt like an eternity to Naruto but was actually closer to 2 minutes, Mabui opened the door. She glanced down at Naruto and smiled at just how excited he looked. "Hello, Naruto-kun. What brings you here?" "Hi Mabui-chan. I just got back from the Raikage's office and I have great news." Mabui allowed herself to have a small laugh at his enthusiasm. "Oh? And just what is this great news?" Naruto's face crunched up in concentration for a moment. "It's a secret. I'm only allowed to tell the people the Raikage lets me tell." Mabui raised an eyebrow and Naruto hastened to reassure her. "Don't worry though. I asked a Raikage and he let me tell you. We just have to go where no one can hear us." At this Mabui raised her other eyebrow but invited Naruto in. She closed her door and activated a sealing array that was inset in the door jamb. After a quick check to make sure it was working correctly, she turned to Naruto again. "Alright, we have complete privacy now. No one can overhear us so you can tell me your big secret," she said playfully. Naruto nodded his head as seriously as he could. Unfortunately he was 6 and couldn't completely pull off a serious look. "I had my medical exam today. The doctor said that I definitely have a Kekkei Genkai. They even taught me a water jutsu because my Kekkei Genkai is supposed to come with an affinity for water." Mabui blinked in surprise. Learning an elemental jutsu was an incredible feat for a 6-year-old with no prior training. His elemental affinity had to be ridiculously strong. "Really? That's great. What did you learn?" Naruto beamed at the praise Mabui gave him. "It was one of the ones that I brought with the jutsu scrolls. It's called water release. Water purification jutsu and it's used to make dirty water clean to drink." "That's amazing. You'll make a great shinobi for sure. And don't worry, I won't tell anyone about your secret," Mabui promised. Naruto shook his head and quickly corrected her. "Oh, no, that's not the secret. That's just something that happened that I thought was really cool. The secret was after that when the doctor was checking me out for seals they found something." Mabui quickly became concerned but tried to hide it. Seals were always tricky and she knew that they could be quite dangerous. "Really? What did they find?" Naruto glanced around again, as if looking for spies in her living room. He leaned forward and whispered his next statement. "They found I have the Kyuubi no Kitsune sealed in my stomach. Isn't it great?" Mabui froze as she tried to process what he just said. What? Now that he had told his secret to Mabui, Naruto started becoming more excited. "They found that I'm a Jinchuriki. And how is that great news?" she choked out. Naruto looked at her strangely, his earlier enthusiasm dulled by her own lack of enthusiasm. "It's great because that means when I gain control of my Bijuu's power, I'll become a really powerful shinobi. Also, I found out that there are other Jinchuriki here. B promised to help me gain control of the Kyuubi's power when I get older and to introduce me to Yujito. I just know we will be great friends." Mabui was still quite shocked by the news that Naruto had just given her. She wanted to tell him that being a Jinchuriki was not easy or safe, but as she looked at him, she just couldn't bring herself to do it. He looked so happy and excited that she couldn't bring herself to do anything that dimmed his enthusiasm. Finally she just smiled at him. "That sounds great. I know you'll be a great shinobi, even without being a Jinchuriki. Just remember not to rely on any one power too much, to keep pushing yourself, especially when you think you've reached your limits, and to take time to enjoy life." Naruto looked at her, as solemn as a 6-year-old boy can be. "Alright, Mabui-chan, I will remember what you've told me. I'll become a great shinobi, I won't let you down." She smiled and reached out to ruffle his hair. He squirmed uncomfortably and she laughed. "Alright, now that you've told me your secret, let's go out and do something." Naruto stopped his squirming and brightened up. "Oh, I almost forgot. I wanted to ask for your help getting some things for my apartment. I have all the money the Raikage gave me and I need some furniture and stuff." Mabui smiled at Naruto. "And what stuff do you need?" Not knowing the suffering that his next words would cause, Naruto answered her question happily. "Well, if I want to be the best shinobi ever I need to get started. So other than furniture and food I need to get things like kunai and shuriken. I guess I also need some new clothing." He trailed off as he saw Mabui smile. For some reason that smile made him more scared than he had been when he had fought the bandits. "Clothing? I think can handle that." Mabui reached out and grabbed Naruto's hand. He followed after her, a small part of him regretting asking her. After a moment he pushed that a part of him away. After all, Mabui-chan was fun, and how bad could shopping be anyway? The Kumo ninja. Naruto was frustrated. This was a fairly new sensation for him, or rather an old one. He had often been frustrated in the orphanage when he was treated unfairly by the matrons, but when he was thrown out he had not really had time for emotions. Now, in Kumo, he had time to experience emotions again, and he was glad for it. He just wished that frustration was an emotion that had never come back. Finally he threw the scroll in his hand on the floor. "Ahhh," he screamed. "Why won't this work?" Naruto took a long moment to try to get himself calm again. He closed his eyes and took deep breaths until his desire to scream faded away. When he was once again calm, he moved over to the scroll that was resting where he threw it. Naruto leaned down and picked up the scroll. He slowly smoothed out the wrinkles that had formed and looked it over again. He put the scroll on his table and slowly went through the hand signs, making sure that they were as perfect as he could make them. He felt his chakra moving inside of him, flowing in interesting ways as his hands moved. Finally he reached the last sign and felt his chakra flare. He looked around the room to find that absolutely nothing had changed. After a few more deep breaths Naruto felt calm enough to think again. He knew that he was definitely doing something wrong, but he had no clue what it was. After another moment of deep contemplation he knew that there was only one thing to do. Naruto picked up the scroll again, left his apartment and moved down the hall. After only one more minute of hesitation Naruto knocked on the door. The door opened immediately, as if the person inside was waiting for him to show up. Naruto walked in and looked up at Mabui, his eyes as large and pathetic as he could make them. "I couldn't do it." Mabui smiled gently down at him. "Of course you couldn't do it. It takes quite a bit of time for a person's chakra to develop enough to do jutsu. That's why the academy starts when you're 10, not when you're 6. Naruto shook his head vigorously. "No, that's not what I meant. I could do that water jutsu that the doctor showed me fine, and I can feel my chakra moving when I'm trying to make a clone, but it just isn't working." Mabui blinked in surprise and frowned. "You mean you can actually feel your chakra moving as you do hand signs?" Naruto nodded his head. "Yes. My chakra moves around as I make each hand sign, just like with the water one. It's just that at the end, nothing happens." Mabui nodded her head slowly as she thought about what he had said. After a minute of thinking she nodded her head as she reached a decision. "Let me see here. This is a little over my head. Just wait a minute please." Naruto went to ask a question but stopped when he realized that Mabui was gone. He shook his head and moved further into the room. He took a seat and decided to pass the time by making hand signs to see just how his chakra moved. Naruto didn't have to wait long. After only 5 minutes of making motions, both the hand signs that he knew and random ones to see how his chakra reacted, Mabui and C appeared in the room again. Naruto got up and C turned towards him. "Mabui-san tells me that you're trying to learn some jutsu and that you're having trouble. She also tells me that you can feel your chakra moving, but that nothing happens." Naruto nodded his head but decided to speak. He had nothing to add to what Mabui had already told C. After another moment C realized that Naruto was not going to speak so he decided to continue. Alright then. Why don't you just do what you normally do and I'll see if I can find what's wrong." This time Naruto replied. "Alright, no problem." He again went through the hand signs, his concentration so total that he missed the amazed look that formed on C's face. When he reached the end of his hand signs he exclaimed clone jutsu. Naruto felt his chakra flare once again. He looked around, just as excitedly as when he had tried the technique before, but his face fell as he realized that once again, nothing happened. Naruto sighed and turned to face C, a look of total helplessness on his face. "See? My chakra moves around and it gets released, but nothing happens. Not even smoke. I've tried it like 20 times and nothing seems to work. What am I doing wrong?" C stared at Naruto for a moment longer before he managed to compose himself. Finally he answered Naruto, his voice still showing the amazement he felt. Wow. I have to say that you got the hand signs correct, but that your chakra didn't move quite right to each sign. I also have to say that you put way too much power into the technique. Completely overpowering a technique will also cause it to fail." Naruto nodded his head as he thought about what he had heard. After a moment he nodded his understanding. Then he turned around and made the signs again. "Clone jutsu?" Naruto glanced around the room excitedly only to once again be met with disappointment. He frowned before letting a look of determination settle on his features. "Clone jutsu? Clone jutsu? Clone jutsu? Clone jutsu?" Finally Naruto reached his limit. You have got to be kidding me. That's the smallest amount of chakra I can use. Why isn't anything happening?" Mabui decided to intervene before Naruto had a chance to get angry. "Look Naruto, it's alright if you can't do a jutsu on your first try. Most shinobi take months to learn a new jutsu. You have years to practice before you can even think about becoming a shinobi, so you have time. C nodded from his place beside Mabui. He knew that she was trying to keep Naruto from getting discouraged and he agreed with her decision. That's right. Besides, I mentioned that power wasn't the only issue that you had with the jutsu, you are also molding your chakra differently than most people, so you need to figure that out as well. Naruto nodded his head dejectedly. He knew that they were more experienced and they knew what they were talking about, but he wanted results quickly. He had gotten that water jutsu quickly, so he had hoped to get others just as fast. Finally he straightened up and nodded his head, decisively this time. Right. No problem. No matter how much work I have to do, I'll get this down. I have to if I want to be the strongest shinobi ever after all. Mabui sighed in relief, she was glad that the incident hadn't damaged his confidence in himself. She smiled at him and decided to offer her help. That's great to hear. Now then, I'm not sure how to go about fixing the way you mold chakra, but learning to control your chakra is common enough. I'll teach you an exercise you can do so you can decrease the amount of chakra you use. Naruto jumped up and down from excitement. Wow, really? Awesome. What is it? What do I have to do? Mabui laughed to herself and tried to get him to calm down a little. Alright, settle down now. You need concentration to do this, at least at first. Once Naruto calmed down enough to pay attention, she continued her explanation. This is the most basic chakra control exercise. It's called the object sticking exercise. What you do is use your chakra to stick an object to your body. The objects start off small and light but get heavier and larger as you get better. Naruto nodded enthusiastically to show that he had understood her and looked around for something to use for the exercise. Mabui smiled at his drive to learn and handed him a blank scroll from her desk. Now then, most people start by sticking things to their foreheads. They use other places to increase the difficulty. Remember that too little chakra means that the scroll falls off and too much chakra causes the scroll to fly away. Naruto nodded, placed the scroll on his forehead and used the least amount of chakra he could manage. He gently pushed it from his forehead into the scroll. As soon as his chakra touched the scroll, it exploded from his grip, flew across the room and tore itself to pieces. All three people in the room stared at the destroyed scroll in amazement. Mabui was the first to react. Well. That was too much chakra, I guess this will take a while to learn. Naruto nodded his head and accepted another scroll from Mabui. Scene break. Naruto frowned in concentration. He placed the piece of shredded scroll on his forehead and gently pushed chakra into piece of paper, immediately tore itself from his grasp and blew across the room. He got up and headed to the pile of destroyed scrolls that rested against the wall he was facing. Before he reached it, however, he was stopped by C's voice. This isn't working. Mabui immediately tried to argue with him. What? What do you mean? This takes time. You just. No. C interrupted. It's not working. Naruto has been trying the same exercise for 3 hours now and not one change had occurred. I'm not saying a noticeable change, I mean any change at all. That means this exercise is useless. Naruto's face fell. I'm trying the best I can. This time C interrupted Naruto. Relax. I know you're trying as hard as you can, in fact most people would have taken a break an hour ago. It's not your fault you're not getting the exercise, it's just impossible for you right now. Mabui frowned and went to argue with C's opinion. C noticed her open her mouth so he quickly continued. What I mean is that this exercise simply uses too little chakra to teach you anything. You have so much chakra that you completely overpower the technique and get nothing from it. Naruto looked downcast, how was he supposed to be a great shinobi if he couldn't use any jutsu? C saw how depressed Naruto was getting and he hastened to relieve his worry. That means we need to come back to this exercise later when you have better control. To get that control we just have to start you on a different exercise, one that uses more chakra. Mabui slowly nodded her head. I guess I can see your point. If he can't do object sticking exercise we can start him on wall walking. It uses a lot more chakra so he will have better success with it. C shook his head in disagreement. No, I don't think that would help either. Mabui blinked in surprise. What? Why? C pursed his lips for a moment, thinking deeply on how best to describe his thoughts, before he relaxed and began an explanation. The wall walking exercise does use more chakra, but it also requires more finesse than Naruto has right now. That finesse is usually gained by doing smaller exercises like the one before. No, what we need is a chakra control exercise that uses a lot of power with little finesse right now. We can go back and work on finesse once he can control the amount of chakra he uses. Mabui nodded her head slowly in response. I guess that makes sense. She paused before continuing more confidently. Alright. I just know the basic control exercises, so I guess we will have to do research or make one up. C smiled at her reply. No we won't, I have just the technique that will help. He turned to Naruto to continue his explanation. Most chakra control exercises focus on allowing a shinobi use minimal amounts of chakra for jutsu or increasing the control they have over their chakra so they don't waste chakra when the use is useful for most ordinary shinobi and ordinary techniques. That being said, some techniques only get stronger when overpowered and those kinds of chakra control exercises leave a shinobi ill-prepared to use them. Naruto nodded to show that he understood what he was being told. To help train shinobi to utilize large amount of chakra, there are other techniques, ones that use a lot of power with little control, at least at first. I think we will start you on one of the most advanced and work your way down until you can control your chakra enough to do the delicate work. Naruto pumped his fist into the air. He was so excited that he would be able to learn to control his chakra. Alright. I'll work on this until I master my chakra. Then I'll learn all the techniques I can until I become the most powerful shinobi in the world. C smiled and began explaining the exercise. This technique is called the chakra bubble. It works on the principle of chakra repulsion. Seeing Naruto's confused expression, Mabui jumped in to explain a little about chakra. You see, Naruto-kun, chakra is a strange force that no one really understands. What we do know is that in its most pure form we can use outside of our bodies, that's what we use in chakra control exercises. Chakra has a push-pull nature. That means that up until a certain point chakra pulls things to it. After that point, chakra pushes things away from it, right? Most of the exercises we mentioned before use the before point to pull things to you or you to things. This exercise is based on that after point to push you away from things and things away from you. Naruto took a moment to absorb the information about chakra. That seemed like it could be useful later. Finally he nodded his head to indicate that C could continue. Now this exercise in its final form creates a bubble of chakra around you that pushes everything away from you, including the ground, until you can float without damaging the ground. Mabui turned her head sharply to face C. What? That technique has to be ridiculously complicated and has to require much more finesse than wall walking. You can't expect Naruto-kun to learn this technique with no prior training. C waved away her concerns. Now. I wouldn't have brought it up if I didn't have a plan. Just listen. Mabui nodded her head guardedly. She didn't want C to get Naruto's hopes up with an impossible dream. You are right to say that the technique is impossible to learn with no prior training. That being said, there are a few steps that someone has to do before they get up to completing the technique that will be perfect for Naruto-kun. Once he can finish the steps he can right now, he can move to a lower level exercise and complete the chakra bubble later. Naruto decided to jump into the conversation. He didn't like that Mabui didn't think he could learn this technique. I'll learn the chakra bubble in no time at all. I'll even master the technique before I join the academy. That's my promise. Mabui and C smiled at Naruto's enthusiasm and childlike confidence. Alright then. When we get to the point that I feel we can move on to another exercise, I will tell you how to continue this exercise. Just don't focus on the chakra bubble to the exclusion of your other techniques. Naruto nodded solemnly and promised to not get distracted. You also have to promise to follow the rules I give you about learning this technique. It uses a lot of chakra so it can be very dangerous. Alright. I'll be careful. Good. Now, the first rule is to always practice this technique outside. It can be very destructive, especially in its initial stages, and you don't want to damage any buildings. I'll show you a place you can go to practice. I understand, C-san. The second rule is that you're not to practice this technique for more than 4 hours a day. This must be in blocks of at most 2 hours at a time, with at least a 3-hour break in between. This technique uses a lot of chakra, and if you're not careful you can get chakra exhaustion, which is dangerous. Naruto frowned in disappointment at not getting to practice constantly, but nodded his agreement. The final rule is that you are not to show anyone how to do this technique. If anyone tries it without properly knowing what can happen and without proper instruction, it can be quite dangerous. When Naruto finished giving his agreement for the third time, C began to explain the actual technique. The chakra bubble is very complex. To finish the technique you would have to release the exact same amount of chakra out of every tenketsu on your body simultaneously, then use shape transformation to shape the chakra into a bubble and push enough chakra into the technique to levitate while keeping enough control to keep from damaging the area under you. Naruto's eyes got huge as he listened to what he had to do. He didn't understand everything, but it sounded complex and difficult. Like I said earlier, this technique has many steps to getting that far. The one we'll start with is actually the levitating. To do this you have to push chakra out from your feet until you can stand on your chakra like it was the earth. Don't worry about damaging the ground or how high you end up when you're stable, that's for later, you just need to get stable first. Naruto grinned with joy, flying, or at least levitating, sounded awesome. His excitement was cut short when Mabui decided to cut in. That sounds really dangerous, especially because Naruto-kun doesn't have any control and has massive amounts of chakra. He could blast himself high in the air and get hurt by the fall. C had anticipated her objection and had a reply ready. I plan to have him practice on training ground 76. Seeing Naruto's confusion, C decided to elaborate. Training ground 76 is primarily used for learning to enhance your muscles with chakra. While learning it is possible to enhance your muscles to the point that you can seriously hurt yourself by moving incorrectly. That training ground had a special seal to stop dangerous movements safely. Naruto nodded excitedly once again. He jumped up and made to run to the door. Alright. Let's get going. The sooner I learn this, the sooner I can become a powerful shinobi. Mabui chuckled to herself but stopped him from leaving. Just on minute, Naruto-kun. I have a few more things I want to talk to you about before C shows you this technique. Naruto pouted in disappointment but sat down. Oh, what is it? I want to learn how to levitate. C snorted in amusement, but Mabui ignored him and put on a serious expression. I realize that you want to become a powerful shinobi, the most powerful shinobi in the world in fact, and I want to help you achieve your dream. That being said, I also want you to train as safely as you can, so I want to go over some rules you have to follow while training. Naruto nodded his head, trying to be as serious as he could be. No one had ever cared about his safety before and it felt nice to be wanted. Now, the first and probably most important rule is that you are not allowed to do physical conditioning. What? Why? How will I become a powerful shinobi if I can't train? Naruto-kun, calm down. I'm not saying that you can never train, in fact you will definitely have to train as you get older. I'm just saying that you can't train until you get older. Naruto frowned as he asked his question again. But, why? Mabui sighed at his expression. She knew that if she didn't explain herself to his satisfaction he would go off and try to train by himself. She didn't want that, he could get seriously hurt. Listen Naruto-kun, the body of a child is constantly growing and changing as you get older and are exposed to different stresses. This means that if you put too much strain on your body you could seriously damage yourself. Naruto frowned, clearly not agreeing with what she was saying, so she continued her explanation. Physical conditioning is all about putting strain on your body and letting it heal. That kind of strain could seriously hurt you until you get older. At the very least it would stunt your growth. Naruto nodded his head very slowly. So when does it get safe for me to start training? Mabui frowned in thought and glanced at C. He thought for a moment before answering Naruto's question. I'll answer that one Naruto-kun. As a shinobi with medical training I know a lot about the human body. Generally, the best time to do physical conditioning safely is after your body hits its maturity. Around the age of 12 or 13 I would guess. But that's so long. Naruto whined. How am I supposed to be a shinobi if I can't train until I'm 12? Mabui sighed at his stubbornness and decided to compromise a little before he decided to ignore their warning. You can do some exercises, just not the amount that most shinobi do. Too much exercise in too short a period of time is what causes the damage I'm worried about. You have to work your way up gradually, at least until your body starts to mature, then you can really start physically training. C threw in some more support to make sure that Naruto would follow her advice. Besides, you already have so much to do that you wouldn't be able to really focus on physical conditioning. Naruto blinked in surprise. Really? What do I have to do? C smirked inwardly as he caught Naruto's attention. It looked like that they had gotten through to Naruto after all. Well, first you have to work on chakra control. That will take a lot of time. Then you need to fix your problem molding chakra. After you finish that you can start to learn ninjutsu and jinjutsu. They use chakra so you can do as much training as you want. Mabui quickly continued before Naruto could protest that it wasn't enough. You also need to learn the skills shinobi need to survive. Things like first aid, wilderness survival, stealth, and strategy. If that isn't enough you have to learn how to throw kunai, shuriken and senbon, how to identify, use and counter poisons, and how to make, detect and disarm traps. Naruto's eyes grew wider and wider as the two shinobi added more topics he would need to learn. C started to smirk outwardly as he threw out a few more topics. And on top of all that you can start to learning a taijutsu, a kinjutsu and or a bukijutsu style. You can learn the forms, how to use the weapons and get some muscle memory before you start physical conditioning to make yourself faster and stronger. Mabui also saw how big Naruto's eyes were getting and decided to make sure that he was far too busy learning to worry about intense physical conditioning. If you're really good you can also learn things like nature transformation, shape transformation, chakra flow techniques, Huinjutsu, how to use your Bijuu's power, how to use your Kekkei Genkai, and possibly start making your own techniques to use. Naruto's eyes were so wide that C thought for a moment that they would fall out of his head. Whoa. That's a lot of stuff. I have to learn all that before I can become a proper shinobi? Naruto asked nervously. Mabui chuckled and began to ease Naruto's worry. No. You don't have to learn all that to be a shinobi. That's just the kinds of things that you need to learn to be the strongest shinobi in the world. We'll start you off slowly and add more as you show you can handle it. Naruto sighed in relief. So, what are we going to start with? C's chuckle gained Naruto's attention once again. Have you forgotten already? We were just about to start your chakra control lessons. Most of the things on the list are difficult or impossible to do with poor chakra control. Naruto nodded sheepishly. He had forgotten about what they were doing, first in his disappointment at being told he couldn't train, and then at his worry about how much he would have to learn. You can also start learning some shinobi skills like first aid, trap making and wilderness survival while you have to rest. Mabui added. I will lend you some scrolls you should read. You can learn a lot from them and they will get you ready for practical lessons in each subject. When Naruto nodded his understanding, Mabui continued with her previous topic. Now then, before we were interrupted, I was telling you the rules I expect you to follow while training. Naruto looked down sheepishly. He knew that it was his outburst that had caused her to stop her list of rules and kept him from training for even longer. Before he could apologize, Mabui spoke again. Don't worry about it, Naruto-kun. Just remember and follow the rules. Alright, Mabui-chan. I know you're just looking out for me, so I'll do as you ask. That's good, Naruto-kun. Like I said before, the first rule is that you're not allowed to follow a shinobi physical training regime until you're older. The second rule is that you're to follow any and all instructions we give you about an exercise. Limits like the one C gave you for the chakra bubble exercise are supposed to keep you safe, so make sure you follow them. I will follow your instructions, Mabui-chan, C-san, don't worry. Good. The third rule is that you have to take care of yourself while training. That means no skipping meals, staying up all night, or pushing yourself to the point that you could hurt yourself. You need to be in top condition or you could hurt yourself badly. I understand, Mabui-chan. I mean it, Naruto-kun. You also have to take breaks from all training to just be a child, not just taking breaks to study shinobi skills in between chakra exercises and your physical training. But, why? Naruto pouted. I want to learn to be a shinobi as fast as possible. Why do I need to stop training to just do nothing? Naruto, this is very serious. C answered Naruto's question, his face as serious as Naruto had ever seen it before. Being a shinobi is a dangerous profession. Death will be a constant companion, you will have to deal with the darkest parts of humanity, and you will see and possibly do many terrible things. Shinobi who don't have some kind of coping mechanism will break under the strain they are placed under. Taking time to just be a kid will help you later, when you are an actual shinobi yourself. Naruto nodded hesitantly. He remembered how he felt when he had killed that bandit from before and realized that he would have to kill again. He suddenly felt a little better about taking time to just be a child. Alright, C-san. I understand and will make sure to take breaks when I can get them. C nodded his head, sad that he had to reveal such a harsh truth to the young boy, but pleased that Naruto remained resolute and that Naruto would listen to his advice. Mabui continued by finishing her rules. The fourth rule is you need to come to either me, C or B before starting a new training exercise. We need to make sure that you're learning safely and can give you tips or help to make sure you get the most from training. No problem, Mabui-chan. I'll come to you before I start training anything new. Good. The final rule you have to follow is that you are not allowed to teach anyone anything we teach you without our permission. Some things we are teaching you can be dangerous if they not performed correctly or they are done by a person who is not ready. Only we can tell if someone is ready or not to learn the things we're teaching you, so come to us if anyone wants to learn what you're learning. Naruto nodded his head to show his understanding. Alright, Mabui-chan. I will follow your rules. Mabui smiled. Good. When we're training, call me Mabui-sensei. You can call me Mabui-chan again when we're done. Now follow me closely. I'll show you to the training ground the first few times you do this training, but you'll need to remember how to get there for later. Naruto jumped up and followed Mabui closely. He was excited that he was one step closer to accomplishing his dream. Scene break. Naruto walked through the streets of Kumo, his hand in his pockets and a huge grin on his face. It was barely even 1 week after C had shown him how to start the chakra bubble exercise, and while he had not mastered the first step or even really completed it, Naruto was making serious progress. C had been very impressed at how fast he was progressing with his chakra control. C had even predicted that he would finish the exercise by the end of the next week and master it enough to move on by the end of the month. He was doing less well on his reading, but no one was disappointed by that. He had tried his best to puzzle through the scrolls on his own, but it ultimately had to go to Mabui for help. Mabui had been angered when she found out that no one had even bothered to teach him to read. She had immediately begun to teach him how to read whenever she could, and Naruto soaked up the knowledge like a sponge. Mabui had told him that he would be ready to start puzzling through the scrolls she had originally given him in another 2 months. None of that was what had put the smile on Naruto's face, however. The event that had Naruto so excited was the large festival that was going on around him. He was not actually sure just what the people around him were celebrating, but he was celebrating his new beginning as a citizen of Kumo. Naruto finally decided that his first destination had to be one of the many carnival games stalls that lined the streets. He tried to see what every stall around him was doing so he could pick the best activity for himself, but found that he was too short to get a good look into each stall. Finally Naruto gave up on his attempted reconnaissance and decided to just pick a stall at random. He closed his eyes and span around, upsetting many of the people trying to walk past him, and found himself facing a small hut that had few people around it. Naruto shrugged his shoulders at his random choice and headed in the direction he was facing. He quickly ducked through the crowd and pulled himself up into one of the many seats facing the interior of the hut. Inside the small gaming hut was a small, mousy-looking man. He was dressed in a bright coat with rhinestones scattered across it in the shape of constellations that seemed just a little too large for the man inside. Naruto quickly noticed that there was only one other person sitting at the stall with him. The person was a young, blonde girl that he thought was around his age. She was wearing black shinobi-style pants and a pale pink shirt. The girl looked over at the noise he made when he sat down and a huge smile grew across her face. "Alright," the girl exclaimed. Finally. Naruto blinked in surprise. "Huh?" he asked intelligently. The girl snorted. "I've been waiting 10 minutes for someone else to want to play this game. He only lets people play it in pairs because he wants people to compete for prizes." Naruto looked over at the mousy-looking man. He nodded his head in what Naruto could tell was fake enthusiasm. "The little lady is correct," the man replied in an unnecessarily grand voice. "You need 2 people to play this game. It's more exciting if there can only be one winner." Naruto looked back at the girl and she explained a little more. "This is the only game that I've found so far that has shinobi gear as prizes." Naruto's head snapped back towards the man only to receive another nod. "The lady is correct again. I am proud to announce that this is the only stall in the whole fair that uses shinobi training gear as prizes. Instead of getting stuffed animals or action figures, you can win training shuriken or blunted kunai." Naruto jumped up and down in his seat excitedly. This was so much better than he had originally thought. Not only did he get to play the fun games other kids used to talk about, but he got training material out of it too. "That's awesome. What do I have to do?" The man immediately jumped into the quick, precise patter of a man who had given a speech many times before. "This is the amazing shinobi games. Here you have to compete with a partner by throwing ping pong balls into the cups to get prizes. Blue cups are 1 point, red cups are 2 points, green cups are 5 points, and the gold cup is worth an amazing 10 points. At the end, the person with the most points wins and gets to choose a prize based on how many points they have." Naruto frowned as he thought about the rules. What about the other person though? The carnival worker shrugged. "They're welcome to try again later." Naruto bit his lip in indecision for a moment before he shrugged and nodded his head. "Alright, I'll play." The girl and the man both smiled, apparently this wasn't a popular stall. The man added the last few rules now that he had reeled them in. "Great. It's 5 ping pong balls for 50 rim. It's also against the rules for any active duty shinobi to play, too easy for them." Naruto nodded and handed over the 50 rim. The girl had evidently paid before because the man immediately handed over the ping pong balls to each of them. Naruto picked up the ball and bounced it in his hand. He took careful aim and threw the ball. It flew through the air at the gold cup, bounced off the rim and landed in a blue cup. He groaned in dismay before trying again for the same results. He finally decided that the gold cup was just too difficult for him and went after a green cup instead. He threw 2 more balls before glancing at his opponent. He watched as she threw her last ball into another green cup and tallied up her score. He quickly realized that she had gotten 4 green cups and a blue cup. Thinking that he had no way to win this, he tossed his ball without looking at his target. Naruto quickly looked up however when the man declared winner. The boy with the yellow hair. To Naruto's amazement, his last ball had fallen directly in the gold cup that he had tried to hit in the beginning. He was shaken out of his shock when the girl got up. She quickly walked away with a frown on her face. Naruto wanted to tell her that he would play her again and that she shouldn't be so sad, but he was distracted by the mouse-like man. "You got a total of 22 points. That means you can get anything on these shelves totaling up to 20 points. Naruto glanced at the shelves the man was pointing to. Sitting on the shelves were training shuriken and kunai, a grappling hook set, some climbing gear, a small spool of ninja wire and a small training sword. He glanced at the price tags and thought about all the cool things he could get with his points, but stopped when he remembered the girl he had won against. Finally he decided and, after he grabbed the items he took, ran in the direction the girl had gone. He caught up to her fairly quickly, her pink shirt and small stature making it easy for him to find her. Naruto ran up to the girl and smiled at her. She blinked in surprise at seeing her recent opponent, unsure just why he had tracked her down. Naruto saw that she was confused, so he decided to take the innovative. "Hi. I'm Naruto Uzumaki and you were really great back there." The girl blinked before blurting out a reply. "What? But I lost." Naruto shook his head at her answer. "Nah, you did way better than what I did. I was just really lucky. You were really precise." The girl let a small smile grow on her lips. "Heh. Well, I've been trying it all day, I should be pretty good by now. Naruto's grin grew wider. Yeah, you totally should have won, that's why I want you to take this. Naruto handed over the small bag that he had been holding. The girl reached into the bag and pulled out a set of black fingerless gloves with 3 thin, straight blades attached to the top by a steel plate. The girl let out a small gasp and looked up at Naruto. He blushed lightly as he explained himself. I saw that you were looking at those climbing gloves earlier and you really should have won, so I got you those. The girl was still looking at him in shock, so Naruto rambled on. I didn't really need any of the stuff he had as prizes, I mean I'm only beginning to train as a shinobi and I'm nowhere near where I need to be too. He was interrupted when the girl gave him a quick hug. This time Naruto was the one shocked speechless as the girl rambled on. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I've been trying to get these gloves all day. This is the only place that I've been able to find gloves like these for under 1000 rim. It's just that I wasn't very good at first and then no one wanted to play and then you came along and… Naruto interrupted her with a chuckle. Hey, it was no problem. Like I said, you really should have won. The girl smiled at him and took a moment to calm down. When she started speaking again she was much more like she had been back at the game stall, excited and happy but under control. Thanks. I've always liked climbing and these will help a lot. I've wanted a set since I saw them, but it takes so much money to get them from a store. Naruto was nodding his head in agreement when the girl seemed to remember that she hadn't introduced herself yet. Oh, right. How rude of me. I forgot to tell you my name. I'm Yujiro Nai, and I want to be the greatest Kunoichi in all the elemental nations. Naruto blinked in surprise. Wait, what? Did you say you were Yujiro? The girl's smile dipped a little and her eyes narrowed. Yeah. You have a problem with that. Naruto shook his head hurriedly. No, not at all. It's just that the Raikage told me to look out for you. He said that you were cool and that we had a lot in common. Yujito's smile grew back to what it originally was. Oh really? What did he say? Naruto looked around for a private place, but quickly found that he couldn't find one. He gave up after a moment and spent another minute trying to figure out how to tell her about his Biju without anyone else overhearing. I guess you could say that we have a lot in common with B-san as well. Yujito blinked at his short answer after taking so long to think of a reply. Then she analyzed exactly what he said and froze. Are you making fun of me? She asked dangerously. Naruto shook his head as seriously as he could manage. No. All 3 of us have a lot in common. I'm supposed to keep it a secret for now, but I'm allowed to tell you. She nodded very slowly before holding up 2 fingers near her waist. Naruto looked around as well before answering her with 9 fingers. Her eyes grew wider at his reply. Seriously? Naruto nodded his head. Yeah. But how? Naruto looked around to make sure that no one was paying attention to them before replying as vaguely as he could manage. I only moved to Kumo recently. Before that I was in Konoha. B.C. and Mabui rescued me and brought me here. Yujito took in his story before nodding her head. She was extremely intelligent and was able to get quite a few details from the short story and she had a pretty good idea of what had happened. Wow. That's actually really cool. And you're around my age too. Naruto nodded enthusiastically. It is really cool. He paused for a moment as he tried to figure out how to continue the conversation. He really liked talking to Yujito, it was almost like he had a friend his own age. So, where were you going before I stopped you? Yujito blinked at the change in topic but realized that there was nothing else that could be discussed outside of a secure place, so she just went along with it. I was going to find someplace to eat. I've been sitting at that stall for 5 hours now. Naruto nodded his head nervously. Ah. I see. Would you like to, maybe, Naruto was interrupted by a laughing Yujito. Sure Naruto-san. I would love to get to know you. Why don't you come with me to get something to eat and then we can explore the fair together. Naruto sighed in relief and grinned. Heh, that was way more awkward than I thought it was going to be. What do you like to eat? Yujito grinned fiercely and relied with a fervor that he had never heard related to a food before. Sushi. Scene break. Naruto concentrated as hard as he possibly could. First he connected with his chakra, a process he had done so many times already it was as easy as breathing. Then he carefully pushed the chakra down to his legs. He had learned to be careful the hard way. Too much chakra too fast would cause his legs to feel like they were burning and would overload his tenketsu. He'd had to stop training for 3 days after he'd done that. Once he had a strong enough flow he gently pushed it out through the tenketsu on his feet. Naruto felt his chakra flow out of his body like it had countless times before. He started by pushing gently, causing him to wobble gently 5 inches above the ground. Slowly he increased the flow of chakra through his feet. He stopped focusing on his surrounding or his balance on the pillar of chakra he was forming, only the stability of the pillar mattered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity to Naruto, the pillar under him stabilized. He felt emotions traveling through him, shock, joy, excitement, before his pillar of chakra started to destabilize. He quickly pushed the emotions away and focused on the pillar. After a moment that seemed to go on forever, the chakra pillar stabilized again. Carefully keeping his focus on his chakra, Naruto opened his eyes. And promptly fell to the ground, 4 feet below him. Naruto felt the hidden seals around him catch him and slow his fall, a feeling he had become familiar with over the past 2 weeks. Normally this feeling came with a spot of disappointment, but this time Naruto felt nothing but pride. He had finally got it right. For just a couple of moments he had actually been levitating on a stable pillar of his own chakra. He glanced up at his sensei, C, who had been watching him practice. C had a large smile on his face as he approached Naruto. "Maybe I was just seeing things, but it looked like you got it that time." Naruto grinned from ear to ear as he replied to C's playful taunt. "You didn't imagine it, I finally managed to levitate." C nodded his head to show his appreciation of Naruto's work. "You did, didn't you? I have to tell you that is the fastest I have ever seen someone complete this portion of the chakra bubble. Of course most people can't work as long as you without getting chakra exhaustion, but then again, they usually have much better control than you do." Naruto's smile grew larger at the praise. He really was advancing in his goal. At this rate he'd be the best shinobi in the world in no time. "So what now, C-sensei?" C put on a fake shocked look. "What do you mean, what now? Now you do it again." Naruto put on his best pout, not that he would ever call it a pout, it was much more like his manly pleading look, and whined at C. "Oh, but why? I finished the exercise, didn't I?" C squatted down so he was at Naruto's eye level. "You did complete it, yes. And if I was any less of a good sensei I would allow you to move on to the next exercise. What you really need to know though is that while you did manage to complete the exercise I gave you, you have nowhere near mastered it." Naruto looked at C's expression and knew that what he was saying had to be important, he only ever had that expression when what he was saying was vitally important. Knowing that, Naruto tried his absolute best to listen and understand. "I don't get it. What do I have to do?" C could see that Naruto wasn't understanding his idea, so he tried to put it in a different way. "Look Naruto, the difference between a good shinobi and a great shinobi is that a good shinobi learns many techniques, while a great shinobi masters many techniques." Naruto instantly knew that he wanted to be a great shinobi, he wanted to be the best, so he asked for some more answers. "What does it mean to master a technique?" C smiled at Naruto's question, he knew that mentioning a great shinobi would get Naruto's attention. "That depends on the technique, Naruto-kun. Generally you know you have learned a technique if you can use it, and you know you have mastered a technique if you can use it naturally, with the least amount of effort possible." Seeing that Naruto was lost, C decided to give some concrete examples. "The things like taijutsu or kinjutsu, you know a move if you can pull it off, but you master a move when using a move becomes natural to you, it becomes something you don't have to think about to do. For ninjutsu or jinjutsu, you usually master a jutsu if you use the least amount of chakra necessary to pull off the technique and if you can do it without at least some of the hand seals." Naruto nodded his head slowly. "So in this, I would have to be able to balance instantly without thinking about it." C nodded his head back and forth to show that Naruto was partially right. "Hinda, if you really want to master this move, you have to be able to do things like build the pillar in under 10 seconds and then be able to fight on it. We aren't going to go that far, for us, mastery is being able to stand on the pillar and deal with distractions without falling." Naruto got a stubborn look on his face. C had just told him that great shinobi had to master techniques and was now telling him that he wouldn't be mastering this. That wasn't going to go over well with the young Jinchuriki. "No, I'm going to master the levitating like you said before." C looked surprised at his defiance. "Oh? Why would you want to do that? It will take much longer to train you up if you try to completely master every technique I teach you." Naruto nodded his head, his face filled with determination. "You said that a great shinobi needs to master the skills that they learn. If I want to be the best shinobi in the world I need to be a great shinobi. I don't care how long it takes, I'll master every technique you give me." C smiled at Naruto's promise. "That's a really good attitude to have. Just remember that mastering a technique takes time and that focusing on mastering a single technique can be worse than just learning a few techniques." Naruto nodded his head slowly, clearly not understanding. C cast around for another way of stating his point before coming up with the perfect way to explain it. Having one mastered jutsu would be better than having two learned jutsu, but mastering that jutsu could take the same amount of time learning 3 jutsu would take. You have to balance your time between learning and mastering techniques because both have their downsides. What is the downside to mastering techniques? C was glad that Naruto was asking questions, he really was becoming a better student every day they worked together. Mastering a technique takes a lot of time and leaves you with a single technique. No technique is unbeatable, so if anyone can defeat your technique you have nothing to fight with. Learning techniques is faster so you have more to use, making you harder to defeat, but someone who masters techniques could be better than you, which would also be bad. Naruto nodded his head confidently. So wouldn't it be best to just master a lot of techniques? Z laughed at his student's question. Of course it would, but that takes a long time. Someday you'll get to that point if you work hard enough, but that's a while off. Now why don't you get back to practicing? If you want to start mastering techniques you'll need all the time you can get. Naruto took one last moment to make sure he would remember this lesson before running back to his practice spot. A small grin on his face and more determined than ever before, Naruto began concentrating. Scene break. Naruto wandered down the street trying to find something to do. He had finished training and didn't feel like reading more scrolls, so he left his apartment to wander Kumo. He felt that he had been working hard lately and that he should take a kid day. The only problem with that is that he had never really had time to do things normal children did, so he was unsure what to do. Naruto walked around aimlessly for an hour before a noise caused him to stop. The noise was a faint clicking sound, like whatever had caused it was far away or muffled. The only reason he had heard it was because he had been training to hear the click most mechanical traps made when triggered, like the scroll he was reading suggested. He immediately froze and looked around, hoping that he hadn't stepped into a trap. After a moment he realized that he was being foolish and relaxed. He was on a busy street and people were walking all around him. If they had no problem with a trap then he wouldn't either. He took another step and froze when he heard the sound again. Naruto frowned and decided to listen more closely. After a moment he heard the click again. The sound was actually fairly rhythmic and muffled. The only reason he had heard the previous clicks was because they were slightly louder than the rest. If Naruto had one fatal flaw as a shinobi it was his curiosity. Now that he heard the faint clicking sounds he had to know what was making it. Following his ears, something he had gotten fairly adept at back in Konoha, Naruto headed off into a small side alley off the street. The back alleys of Kumo were designed by shinobi to help in the event of an invasion. They were long twisting mazes that connected with the sewer and each other to form a second set of streets that could take you almost anywhere in Kumo. Naruto followed the sound through the twisting maze. The sound got louder and Naruto could tell he was getting closer. After a quick 4-minute walk, Naruto came up to a small, enclosed garden hidden. The garden had large brick walls that were taller than most men could climb. There were only 2 entrances to the garden that he could see, one into the building the garden was connected to, and the other a small hole in the wall that was next to him. At some point the entrance to the house had been bricked up, leaving the hole the only entrance to the garden. Finally, having caught up to the clicking noise, Naruto slowly crawled through the small opening in the wall. The garden had obviously seen better days, most of the plants were dead and the few that remained alive ran everywhere. Sitting in the center of the garden was a small fountain that once ran with water endlessly but was now dry and cracked. Naruto headed towards the dry fountain, which was the source of the sounds he was following. He slowly crept up to the fountain and peered over the lip that was designed to keep water in when it still worked. Sitting in the center of the fountain was a young bird. The bird was mostly brown, but it had white feathers around its tail and in the underside of its wings. The feathers around the head were more golden in color, leading to a sharp hooked beak and a pair of golden, almost glowing eyes. The bird was steadily tapping at a metal grate to produce the sound that had attracted Naruto. The grate was supposed to help keep things out of the drain, but it had rusted, leaving small holes. Naruto bumped into the lip of the fountain, causing the bird to look at him. When the bird moved it revealed that the bird's foot had gotten caught in one of the holes in the grate. Naruto climbed into the fountain and approached the bird. The bird watched him carefully as he approached, as if trying to determine he was a threat. Naruto slowed down even more, he knew just how dangerous animals could be if provoked. Naruto slowly reached out towards the bird's leg, attempting to help the bird free itself. The bird let his hand get close before whipping its head around. Naruto snatched his hand back as fast as he could, but the bird was faster. The bird's beak dragged along the side of Naruto's hand, leaving a long, deep cut. Naruto jumped backwards away from the bird, worried it might attack again, but the bird just sat there, his blood staining the edge of its beak. Naruto slowly examined his hand and saw that the cut was already beginning to heal. A proper diet and a real home cleared a lot of the strain his Kekkei Genkai had been under, speeding his healing up considerably. After 1 minute of work the cut stopped bleeding, allowing Naruto to refocus on the bird. He noticed that while the bird had not moved from its spot, it was still watching him intently. Frowning to himself, Naruto sat back on his heels and tried to figure out what to do. He didn't want to just leave the bird trapped, it would starve to death, and Naruto wouldn't wish that on anyone. He also couldn't help free it if the bird kept attacking him. He also couldn't go for help because he wasn't sure he could find this place again. Naruto approached the bird again, but this time sat outside of its range. He decided to try to calm the bird down by talking to it. "Hey now, how did you manage to get in there?" he asked gently. The bird tilted its head to the side but continued watching him. "You look like you're stuck and I just want to help," Naruto continued. The bird tilted its head the other way. I can help you get out, allow you to fly again, you just have to let me help you. The bird did not respond in any way. If I reach out, you don't attack me. Alright. The bird looked like it was considering his words. Finally the bird let out a short screech. Naruto was surprised that the bird responded to him. Even worse, he had kind of understood what it said. Of course I'm not trying to trick you, I really just want to help. I know what it's like to be trapped and hungry, and if I can help then I want to. The bird looked like it was considering his reply before letting out another screech. Hey. No need to be paranoid or anything. I could just walk away, then where would you be? The bird let out another screech, different than the ones before and ruffled its feathers. Naruto briefly wondered if he was insane to think that a bird could have a conversation with him, but he decided to reply anyway. Hey now, there's no need for that. I'm just saying that it's alright to get a little help every now and then. The bird considered his words for a while before letting out another screech and moving its head away from its leg. Naruto briefly hoped that he wasn't being tricked, that beak hurt damn it, but reached out to the bird again. The bird watched him closely but made no move towards his hand. Naruto finally reached its leg and began to feel around the grate that held the bird's leg trapped. The grate had given way under the bird's weight and a piece of metal was wrapped around its foot. Naruto gently grabbed the metal and began to pull. The rusted metal parted easily under his grip and he gently pulled the bird's leg free. The bird hopped away from the grate and landed on the lip of the fountain. Naruto made sure not to move in case he startled the bird. The bird just stared at Naruto for a long moment before giving another screech. You're welcome. Naruto replied automatically. The bird considered him for another moment before letting out a screech that sounded very self-satisfied. Wait, what? What do you mean I'll do? The bird gave a short screech as if explaining. My nest? You mean my home? You want to come home with me? The bird gave a very deliberate nod which convinced Naruto he was not crazy. Alright I guess. You'll have to find your own food mostly, and I usually train most of the day, so you'll have to find something to do, but you can live with me. The bird gave another shriek to show its acceptance. Now then, we just need a name for you. The bird let out another shriek causing Naruto to pause. Do you have a name already? Well, what is it? The bird let out a call that was like a cross between a bark and a cough. Lith, huh? That's a great name. Well hello Lith, I'm Naruto Uzumaki and I think we'll be great friends. The bird let out a call full of joy and Naruto started laughing. The Kumo ninja. Naruto's concentration was interrupted by a shout from across the training field. He cursed inwardly and tried to regain control of his chakra, but found that it was too late. He cursed to himself again as the trickle of water that he had been holding up fell on him once again. Naruto walked out from under the tiny waterfall and looked around for the person who had interrupted his training. No one was immediately visible, but Naruto just took that as a challenge. It took him another 2 minutes to locate a man hiding in a tree nearby. Still acting as though he was looking for the man, Naruto reached into his pocket and grabbed the object sitting there. Naruto took one last glance around to make sure that the man hadn't moved before looking away. Naruto took a deep breath to make sure that his concentration held before drawing and throwing the object he had grabbed, still without looking at the man. As soon as the object left his hand, Naruto whipped his head around to see where it landed. To Naruto's annoyance, the object landed in the man's outstretched hand, which was now right next to him. He pouted resignedly before commenting. Oh, I thought I had you that time. The man took a moment to examine the object he was holding before responding. A marker? Really? Naruto grinned excitedly as he explained. It was Yujito's idea. She said that we should use weighted markers to get an exact mark where we hit. It's loads better than wooden kunai. The man considered Naruto's word for a moment before nodding in acceptance. I guess that works. As long as they're weighted like a kunai they could really help improve your accuracy. Naruto nodded his head in agreement. That's the idea. So far it had only helped a little, but I've only used it for about a week. I want to see what happens if I use it for a month or so. The man nodded his head again. Good. It's actually a very promising training method. If it works as well as I believe it can I'll bring it to the Raikage. He's always looking for better methods to train his shinobi. Naruto beamed at the indirect praise he and his friend had been given. His smile turned more sheepish as he remembered just what had caused the entire marker incident. The man continued on as if he had not realized Naruto's change in mood. I also have to compliment you on your observational skills. That was average genin level stealth and, well you could have and will need to be faster, I've seen a lot worse. Naruto accepted the praise again before bringing up a self-critique of what he felt was the worst part about what had just happened. He had learned that honest self-critiques really helped his training. My control still needs a lot of work though. I shouldn't have gotten distracted by your shout C-sensei. C nodded his head in agreement. You do need some more work, but you're advancing amazingly quickly anyway. It's only been 3 weeks since we started this exercise and 4 months since you gained access to your chakra in the first place. That's amazing progress, it usually takes 2 or 3 years for people to get where you are. It's even more amazing considering just how much chakra you have. Naruto grinned at the praise he had received. He had been working on chakra control as much as he could over the past year, and it looked like it was paying off. C continued with his praise, Naruto really was learning quite quickly. While you still don't have average chakra control, it's at least not bad. I think you're almost ready to start learning jutsu. Not the ones that require careful chakra limits or small amounts of chakra, but jutsu nonetheless. He paused for a moment before completing his thought. That is, if we can figure out your chakra molding problem. Naruto nodded his head firmly before letting out a confident statement. Don't worry, I think I almost have the proper molding for each sign down. I just need to practice more to make it more natural for me. C shrugged his shoulders. He had never run across anyone who had molded chakra like Naruto had. He had also never run across anyone Naruto's age who was self-aware enough of his chakra to correct himself. C noticed that Naruto was preparing to head back to the tiny waterfall and remembered just why he had wanted Naruto's attention in the first place. C called Naruto's attention back to him as he explained what he had in mind. Alright Naruto-kun, I think that's enough chakra control for today. Naruto frowned in irritation. But it's only 2. He whined. I can keep going. I need to keep going if I want to get good enough to do jutsu. C snorted at Naruto's reply. He sometimes forgot that Naruto was still just 6, he usually acted much older. I didn't mean we were going to stop training for the day, I just thought that you had done enough chakra control to start something else. Naruto's eyes grew huge at the thought of something besides more chakra control exercises. Really, what are we going to do? Is it Taijutsu? Or maybe Genjutsu? No, wait, that requires a lot of chakra control. C decided to interrupt Naruto before he decided to just start listing everything a shinobi could do. What can you tell me about the 5 elements? Naruto's attention snapped to the present and he began to give the answer to the question in a fast but clear tone. The 5 chakra elements are fire, wind, lightning, earth, and water. Each element has a weakness and a strength, which means that if 2 jutsu of the same strength but different elements collide, the jutsu with the stronger element will overpower the other jutsu. C nodded his head in motion for Naruto to continue. Everyone is born with an affinity to an element, that is their chakra naturally is more in tune with an element which makes working with that element easier. It is possible to gain other elemental affinities through training, but that takes time. It is also possible to combine elements together to form more powerful attack or other elements, but those take massive amounts of time and practice Surikeke Genkai respectively. C nodded his head again in appreciation. Working on giving reports. Naruto flushed at the comment. When he replied it was with a hint of embarrassment and anger. Yeah, so? Yujito-chan said it was an important skill to learn and it's another thing to do when I can't actively train. C waved away Naruto's concern. No. I didn't say that there was anything wrong with learning how to give a report. In fact, I wish more young shinobi learned how to properly give reports. C watched as Naruto relaxed before returning to the training he had in mind. I have to say that you certainly seem to be reading the scrolls Mabui-san gave you. That was an excellent rundown on the elements. Now then, based on what you just said, can you guess what you're going to be learning? Naruto frowned and ran his hand through his hair in thought. C made a mental note to mention it to Naruto later. It wouldn't do for a shinobi to have such an obvious tell unless he was using it on purpose. C was knocked out of his musings by Naruto's answer. I have to guess that we're going to do nature transformation training. I thought that was a Jonin level technique though, why am I learning it now? C was not surprised that Naruto had guessed what he had in mind, it was fairly easy based on what he had just said. He was also not surprised by Naruto's question and had an answer ready just in case. Nature transformation training is usually a Jonin level technique, but not because of its difficulty. Nature transformation training just takes time and chakra, something most lower level shinobi don't have. Naruto nodded his head to show that he understood. I guess that genin are too busy getting their basics down and chunin have too many missions to spend time on nature transformation training. C shrugged at Naruto's opinion. Probably. It could also be that most shinobi don't want to spend the time training an element because they usually get results slowly. By the time you get to Jonin, your skills are good enough that you can spend time on training that is not immediately useful. Naruto nodded his head to show that he understood C's real meaning. Like his chakra control, nature transformation training would take a lot of time. Luckily for him, time was the one thing that he had in abundance. Well, time and chakra actually. C continued with his explanation. Now water affinity is fairly rare in Kumo, that's usually more of Kiri's specialty. Despite that, I have a friend who mastered water as part of his training and he gave me the first step for you. Naruto nodded his head slowly. He started to speak but hesitated. After another moment, he started speaking slowly, as if taking a great amount of time to consider his words. C-sensei. I don't think that mastering my water affinity is the best idea right now. C raised an eyebrow in surprise. He had not been expecting this. Really? And why's that? Naruto bit his lip and took another moment to think his answer through. Finally he started to speak, gaining confidence with every word. It's because of what you said about mastering and learning jutsu. If I spend all my time working with water, there would be a lot of ways to beat me. If I do a different element though, I'll have the element I worked on and my natural water affinity. That will make me way stronger. C nodded his head slowly as he considered what Naruto said. He decided that Naruto made sense, but he also wanted to make sure that Naruto was thinking this through completely. That makes some sense, but I also said that mastery is important too. Naruto nodded his head. You did, and I can work on mastering my water when I have time later, either before I become a shinobi or after, when I'm a jonin. It's just that you said that my affinity is already really strong, like someone who's in the middle of training, so while training would make it incredibly strong, I don't really need it right now. C gave a shrug and decided that Naruto was right. Alright, since you spent so long thinking this through, what element do you want to learn? Naruto replied instantly, full of confidence and cheer. Lightning. C nodded his head. Lightning made a great deal of sense based on what he had just said. Lightning, huh, that makes sense. Lightning strong against earth which water is weak against. It would also give you some protection from the lighting conductivity that water has, which can also really hurt you. Naruto smiled and gave the rest of his reasoning. Yeah, lightning would really help. It would also allow me to do combo attacks. Well, that and lightning is really common in Kumo. That makes training and finding jutsu easier. C smiled at just how much though Naruto had put into this issue. It showed that he was taking his training seriously and that he was on the right track to becoming a powerful shinobi. Alright then. Lightning it is. I also have to say that you're right about lightning affinities being easy to learn here. We have a ton of tricks and tips to help develop lightning affinities, anything else, not so much. He paused for a moment thinking about what he would need. Finally he pulled 2 kunai from the pouch on his leg and handed them to Naruto. The first step to mastering a lightning affinity is learning to convert your chakra into lightning. To start this you have to push chakra through a piece of metal into another one. As you work, you should get an idea on how the conversion works. Make sure the kunai are touching as you start, you don't need to make it harder on yourself when you're just beginning. You are done with the exercise when you can generate a clearly defined arc of lightning between the 2 kunai while holding them as far apart as your arms will let you. Naruto sat down, pushed the kunai together and began concentrating. C sat down opposite Naruto and began giving him tips. Some people find it easier to study electricity first. They learn the rules lightning follow and how it feels, which helps them create it. Some people also find it easier to use hand signs at first to gather or convert chakra. Naruto nodded as he continued focusing. He slowly gathered his chakra, he wanted control more than speed, and moved it to his hands. He gently pushed it out of his right hand, over the kunai he held, and down the other kunai. Nothing happened, but Naruto was undeterred. Naruto continued his gentle cycle for what felt like an age. Finally, Naruto's patience gave out and his chakra flared. For one moment, Naruto felt something jolt in his chakra. It moved differently than he was used to, fast and jerky, as opposed to gentle and smooth. Then he jerked and let go of both the kunai and his chakra as he was electrocuted. C broke out laughing as Naruto rubbed his hands. The electricity had hurt and left his hands feeling tingly. Finally C stopped laughing when Naruto glared at him. I'm sorry about that, Naruto. I didn't think you would be able to generate some lightning so fast. When you start, your lightning is going to be uncontrolled, so just wrap the handles of the kunai with cloth. It won't change the exercise, and it will help keep shocks down. Naruto grumbled about sensei that didn't give useful information until it was too late, causing C to laugh again. Finally, Naruto picked the kunai up again and wrapped the handles in the sleeves of his jacket, he'd do something more permanent later. Gripping the kunai tightly in each hand, Naruto began to concentrate. Scene break. Naruto grumbled as he tried to rub feeling back into his hands. His jacket had turned out to be a less than perfect insulator, and he had shocked himself quite a few times during the new lesson. He reached out to pick up the kunai again, but was interrupted by C. I think that's enough training for today, Naruto-kun. You don't want to push too hard and hurt yourself. Naruto nodded his head in agreement, but for different reasons. He felt completely fine and knew that he was nowhere near chakra exhaustion, but he was getting frustrated. When he got frustrated, he got less out of his lessons, so he learned to take a break to calm down. Naruto got up, unwrapped his jacket from the kunai, and offered them to C. C shook his head in reply. No, you keep those. This level of nature transformation is safe to do, so you can practice whenever you have time. Just make sure to remember Mabui-san's rules about overtraining. Naruto smiled brightly at finally being allowed to take some training home. He got bored just reading scrolls, and now he would have something to do. Thanks, C-sensei, and don't worry, I'll follow Mabui-chan's rules. C smirked and waved to Naruto in dismissal. Good. Off with you then, just make sure to get a better insulator to protect you from shocks, your jacket clearly wasn't doing enough. Naruto bowed to C in thanks before running towards home. He ran everywhere as much as he could now. It was his response to not being allowed to do serious physical training. Naruto stopped when he heard a familiar screech. He raised his arm on reflex and allowed Lith to land on the thick padding that he had added to all his jackets. Hello, Lith. Good hunt. The bird let out a series of screeches, squawks and barks as Naruto transferred him to his shoulder. Naruto's jacket had more padding on the shoulders than it did on the arms, but the target was currently too small for the bird to land on. Once the bird was safely gripping onto the more stable and padded perch, Naruto continued his path and answered Lith. 2 hairs, huh? Sounds great. I managed to start a new training today, so my day was pretty good. Lith gave another few barks that made Naruto laugh. No, I didn't learn how to make those bird treats you like. I started learning how to do lightning nature transformation. The bird just looked at him, causing Naruto to snort. I know you want me to get the recipe, but we'll just have to make do with buying them. I need to learn to be a powerful shinobi before I can take time to learn other things. Lith stared for a moment more before giving a short screech. Thanks you for being so understanding. Now then, did you see Yujito-chan while you were looking for me? Lith gave another series of barks and screeches, causing Naruto to nod and change his direction. Great job, Lith, I think you get faster every day. Lith puffed himself up and preened at the praise Naruto had given him. He settled down a moment later in favor of tightening his grip as Naruto sped up. Naruto raced through the streets, faster and more agile than he had been just 4 months ago, before disappearing into a back alleyway. He raced along the maze of tunnels and side streets with a confidence born of experience. Finally, Naruto slowed to a gentle jog as he reached a familiar-looking walled garden. In a set of practiced motions, Naruto leaned forward and to the side, allowing Lith to take off from his shoulder and fly over the wall. For his part, Naruto ducked down and crawled through the small entranceway into the garden. When he reached the other side, Naruto stood up and looked around the small garden he had met Lith in. The garden was vastly different from how it had been, he had worked hard to make sure of that. The once dead and overgrown flower beds now held new life and growing plants. The rusted gutters and gratings had been replaced, and the fountain, while still dry, had been repainted to cover up the damage it had endured. Naruto glanced to the right and saw Yujito, who had been waiting in the garden, greeting Lith. He smiled as he remembered the day he had met Lith and what had come after. Flashback. Naruto raced along the maze of back alleys and tunnels he had navigated to reach Lith. It had turned out that he had forgotten the path he had taken to reach the walled garden, so he was lost. Even worse, he was not able to climb to the rooftops around him, that was a privilege reserved for shinobi only, to find his way out. Eventually, he had asked Lith to fly above the labyrinth he was lost in and lead him to an exit. Lith had been very helpful, but he was extremely fast and Naruto had trouble keeping up with him. After dodging around a set of bins resting in his path and turning through a few more alleys, Naruto saw an exit and slowed down. A moment later Lith flew down towards Naruto and landed on his outstretched arm. Naruto grimaced as Lith's talons dug into his arm and made a mental note to get padding added to his cloths to make it more comfortable for them both. He shifted his arm up to help Lith climb to his shoulder. After 2 minutes of careful movements and torn clothing, Naruto made another mental note to make sure they practiced this too. Naruto exited the alleyway and took a moment to find where he was. He was happy to find that he was in a residential area and fairly close to his apartment. Naruto made to start jogging towards home but was interrupted by a squawk from Lith on his shoulder. Naruto glanced at Lith and realized that the bird couldn't hold on to his shoulder if he began running. Wrinkling his nose at the delay and making a note of yet another thing he would have to practice, Naruto set off for his apartment. Naruto walked in silence, thinking about all the things he would have to do now that Lith was coming home with him. He had not realized just how much he would have to change when he had agreed to Lith's proposition. He felt a moment of reluctance before he shook his head and chided himself. He would never not help someone in need if he could help it, even if that person was a bird. Feeling a little better about the whole situation, Naruto began to smile. Besides, he thought I promised Lith I would let him come home with me and be my partner. I've had enough people break their promises to me that I never want to break my promise to someone else. Naruto was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't realize that he had almost reached his home. He was brought out of his thoughts by a bark from his shoulder. Huh? He asked. Naruto glanced around and realized that he was near home. He shook his head ruefully and headed into the building. He moved towards his apartment but stopped at the door. He thought back to the list of things he would have to change for Lith and came to an unwelcome conclusion. He would have to go shopping. Naruto shuddered and released a sigh. He shook his head before turning around and trudging towards Mabui's apartment. He had sworn to never go shopping with Mabui again, but he had no other choice. Naruto reached Mabui's door and knocked. He could hear her moving towards the door and put on a smile. Despite the monster that she became while shopping, Mabui was one of his favorite people. Mabui finally opened the door and smiled down at Naruto. She opened her mouth to speak before catching sight of Lith. She blinked in surprise, shook her head, and looked at Lith again. Naruto spoke with barely concealed amusement. "Hi Mabui-chan. How are you doing?" Mabui blinked again before asking a very important question. "Naruto-kun, why do you have a golden chakra eagle on your shoulder?" Naruto grinned up at her. "Is that what Lith is?" "I just knew that he was a bird, I was going to look for his exact species when I had time later." "Lith? Who's Lith?" Naruto snorted in amusement. Mabui was usually much faster than this. "Lith is the golden chakra eagle on my shoulder." Mabui nodded her head slowly as she adjusted to the news before giving Naruto a wry grin. "Alright, I'm better now. Why don't you two come in?" Naruto followed her into her apartment and sat down on the couch facing Mabui. Lith, taking the opportunity to leave his shoulder, walked down his arm to sit on the wooden arm of the couch. Mabui looked between her two guests before focusing on Naruto. "So how exactly did you manage to wind up with a golden chakra eagle of all things following you home?" Naruto grinned and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "Well, it's kind of a funny story. You see, I was heading back home after I had finished training when I heard a noise." Naruto had proceeded to explain his small adventure to Mabui. After he was done, Mabui sat back and took a moment to process what he had said. Finally she shook her head in equal parts amusement and amazement. "Only you?" She snorted. "Only you could find a golden chakra eagle to partner with while walking home from training." Naruto tilted his head at Mabui's words. He suddenly had the feeling that finding Lith was a much bigger deal than he thought it was. "From the way you say that, I have to think finding Lith was a big deal. What's so special about him?" Lith let out a bark of protest, causing Naruto to quickly amend his statement. "Besides how awesome he clearly is." Lith preened at the praise, causing Mabui to let out a small laugh tinged with disbelief. "So it's true, a real bond. I hadn't ever expected to see one." She shook her head and answered Naruto's question. "Golden chakra eagles are a particularly rare species of eagle that are native to these mountains. Most people will never see a golden chakra eagle in their lifetime. It is said that to see an unbonded golden chakra eagle is to receive a lifetime of good luck." Naruto looked at Lith, who gave the avian equivalent of a shrug. "Alright, I guess. But what do you mean unbonded? What is a bond?" Mabui nodded her head at his question and settled in to explain as best she could. "The bond is what makes golden chakra eagles so amazing. Golden chakra eagles have a rare relationship with chakra. They can feel it and use it but not generate it. As a result, they develop the ability to create a symbiotic chakra bond with creatures that do generate chakra." Naruto nodded his head slowly. "What does symbiotic mean?" "Symbiotic means mutually beneficial. In this case, some of the excess chakra you generate goes to Lith so he can use it. In return, you gain a partner that lives as long as you do, who will protect and help you in whatever way he can. The bond also lets you talk to and understand each other." Naruto looked towards Lith before connecting with his own chakra network. He slowly traced his chakra through his system, trying to find a difference. It took him 2 minutes before he noticed a slight drain attached to his tenketsu and the chakra they always released. Naruto reached his senses out like he did when he was working with the chakra he released from his body. He made no move to mold the chakra, instead he just felt the drain and tried to follow it. It took him another minute before he ended up at what he could only call the bond. Naruto gently pushed his conscious into the bond. Instantly, Naruto felt his mind explode. He felt both his and Lith's chakra system and the bond in between them like they were one being. He brushed against emotions and thoughts that were both foreign and familiar to him that he soon recognized as Lith's. After a moment of wonder, he greeted Lith directly. The emotions turned to surprise before changing to welcoming. The two beings exchanged thoughts of welcome, friendship, peace and hope before Naruto reluctantly pulled away. He knew that he needed to return to Mabui and that he had later to continue exploring this bond. Naruto looked over at Mabui, who was looking extremely concerned. "That was amazing." Mabui blinked before putting together what must have happened. "The bond?" Naruto nodded vigorously. "Yes. It took me a while to find, but it's there. It was amazing to feel. I could meet Lith's mind and feel his emotions. It was like we were one creature with two minds." Mabui took a moment to try to imagine what that must have felt like. She eventually decided that she couldn't, but also didn't think that she would like it that much. Finally she just shook her head and continued with her explanation. "Golden chakra eagle bonds are rare, both because of the rarity of the birds and the rarity of those birds meeting someone with a compatible chakra type. In fact, the last one was over 200 years ago between a golden chakra eagle named Aras and the Shodai Raikage." Naruto smiled at the news before turning to Lith. "Hear that, buddy? Looks like we have an important legacy to live up to. We have to train as much as we can so that we can be as amazing as the Shodai Raikage and his partner." Mabui shook her head in amusement and addressed Naruto once more. "We'll have to go to the Raikage with this. He'll want to know about the bonding." You'll also have to be more careful. A bonding is a big deal and people will want to know more. We'll keep it as quiet as we can, but it increased the likelihood of someone from Konoha finding you." Naruto wrinkled his nose in distaste but nodded. Mabui looked at him and smirked. She would get payback for his surprising her with a golden chakra eagle. "And after we do that, we can go shopping. You'll need a whole new wardrobe to stand up to your partner." Naruto shuddered in horror, despite previously knowing that it was going to happen. Why had it seemed like a good idea to come here again? And flashback. Naruto's shudder at remembering his second full shopping trip with Mabui caused him to pull back into the present. Yujito finished greeting Lith and turned to greet him. Naruto smiled and moved towards his two best friends for an afternoon of just being a kid. He was glad he had come to Kumo. His life was much better here. Scene break. Naruto arrived to the training field that he usually used for training. It was one that was often used for chakra control and water ninjutsu practice. The training ground was in flat section of rock cut into the side of the mountain that was enclosed by rock on 3 sides. 12 waterfalls of various sizes, from a small trickle to a raging torrent, ran down the walls forming rivers of various speeds and sizes that crisscrossed over the field. He made a quick check to make sure that no one was using it, like he had promised C-sensei, before moving to the small waterfall he used for training. Reaching the waterfall, Naruto began his daily chakra control exercise. Naruto stripped off his outer clothing, leaving him in just his bathing suit before moving under the waterfall. He had recently managed to advance from the tiny waterfall he had been training on before, which was barely more than a stream falling on his head, to a larger waterfall that was more like a stream after a particularly heavy rainfall. Naruto sat on a flat rock resting under the flow of water he had set up for just that purpose. He closed his eyes, grasped his chakra, a task much easier now than when he had first started these exercises, and pushed it out from the tenketsu on his head and shoulders. Grasping his chakra in an imaginary hand, Naruto kneaded it into the shape of a dome. He smiled as he felt the water flowing over his head stop. Naruto opened his eyes and glanced up to see the waterfall flowing around the dome of chakra he had created instead of onto his head. He smirked at how much faster and better he was with his chakra than he had been when he started. Finally, Naruto let his moment of self-congratulation end and moved on to the second part of his exercise. Naruto carefully reached out and began changing the dome he had created. He practiced shrinking it, growing it, tilting it and even changing its shape. After an hour of practice, Naruto allowed the dome to stabilize again in a dome, the shape he used most often and the one he was best with. Naruto then began the final segment of his early morning training. He reached out and grabbed the 2 kunai that he had set aside for just that purpose. They were the 2 kunai that he had gotten from C, although they were slightly modified with a thick cloth grip and a blackened blade. Naruto split his attention between the dome of chakra he was using to keep himself dry and the 2 kunai in his hands. He kept the kunai about 1 foot apart and began focusing on creating lightning chakra. He had been doing the mixed exercises for 4 months, only 2 weeks after he had been given the kunai he was now holding. Naruto felt the shift that he had grown used to and watched as lightning began sparking around the kunai in his right hand. He pushed gently and watched as the lightning arced from the tip of the kunai in his right hand to the tip of the kunai in his other hand, and then back in an arc from ring to ring. Naruto slowly began moving the kunai apart while focusing on keeping the stream of lightning steady. The kunai got further and further apart until he held them as far apart as his arms could manage. The arcs of lightning stayed well defined and completely under control, a testament to the many hours of practice he had put into the exercise he was doing. He paused for a moment while thinking about just how much faster and easier this exercise had been than when he had first started. Finally, shaking off the distracting thoughts, he took the fact that he could have distracting thoughts without losing control as a good sign. Naruto moved on to the part of the technique he was still trying to figure out. Naruto slowly nudged and coaxed out small branches of the lightning that made up the arc, moving from one ring to the other, and pulled them into the nerves of his hand. From there, Naruto pulled the lightning up his arm, through his back and then down his other arm, into the other kunai. Naruto made sure to be extremely careful, too much lightning would cause his nerves to burn out, an extremely painful condition that would take him hours to completely heal from. As he pulled more and more lightning free from the arc, he could feel it shrinking until there was just a tiny line, about as thick as a hair, to show where it had existed. He could feel excitement welling up inside of him, but he quickly pushed the feeling away. His excitement had been what had caused him to fail the last time he had tried this. Gently grasping the last branch of lightning, Naruto pulled it inside himself and along the path the rest of the lightning had followed. Naruto held himself tense for another 2 minutes while getting a feel for how his chakra and the lightning he had created flowed. Finally, he allowed himself to relax and slowly open his eyes. He could feel the lightning fight to escape his mental grasp as his attention was divided once more, but he held firm. It took him another 2 minutes before he could finally open his eyes. There, he found a single arc of lightning dancing between the tips of the two kunai, as sharp and well-defined as a katana's blade. Naruto carefully let the lightning conversion go and watched as the arc disappeared. Next he carefully pushed the lightning still in his body down into the rock he was sitting on, safely grounding it out. Finally, he got up, stepped out from under the waterfall, and allowed his chakra to settle back into his body, waiting to be used again. When he had released all control over his chakra, Naruto broke out into a huge grin. He had finally done it. After 4 months of hard work, he had finished the first task of lightning nature transformation that C had given him. He was so busy congratulating himself, he failed to notice that he had an audience. He quickly became aware of this fact when they broke out into applause. Startled, Naruto jumped around before relaxing when he saw exactly who was clapping. C and Mabui walked closer to him and began congratulating him.